Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to the August 28th STEM Council meeting. I thought we'd start with introductions again and see who's on the phone also. So we'll go around the table here first. Go ahead.
Eric Meslow, Timbercon.
Aubrey Clark, Intel.
Mark Lewis, Chief Education Office.
Jim Pyro, Portland General.
Thompson Morrison, Innovate Oregon.
Good. And who do we have on the phone?
Cindy Robert from the Oregon Alliance of Independent Colleges and Universities and the Chalkboard Project.
Thank you.
Christina Regal at Western Oregon University, the Research Institute.
Thank you.
Jan Osborne, Portland Public School CTE program.
Great, thank you.
Don Dell.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Yes. Steve Thorpe at Southern Oregon University with the Southern Oregon STEM Hub.
Oh, well, welcome. Thank you.
Dietrich Steinmetz with Portland Community College.
Okay, why don't we just go around the audience here?
If people on the phone could please mute themselves, that would be fantastic. Thank you.
Yep. So we'll have Lindsay. You'll be up here later to talk. So Lindsay Capps.
Lindsay Capps, Office of Governor Kate Brown.
Yep.
I'm Paul Anthony. I'm with Portland School Board.
Linda Vansell, David Douglas School District.
Thank you.
Jerry Nabel, Portland Metro STEM Partnership.
Susan Sugarman, OHSU. Sammy Grinnell, Hillsborough School District.
Great.
Laura Roach, Oregon Department of Education.
Darren Marks, Business Education Compact.
Okay. Thank you. Well, we have a full agenda. A lot has happened since our last meeting, and we'll turn it over to Mark to give an update on some of the activities that have occurred since we last met. So.
Yeah, thank you. It seems both a short time ago and a long time ago that that we met, and we know that time is not linear based on our own perspectives. And if you want to argue the physics of that, I'm happy to do so. But I think this is it's a tremendous opportunity as we go into a new school year to really refresh the work ahead of us with some solid investments, $12.3 million in investments that are under our belt, and actually more than that if we include the Oregon Talent Council, which is a complementary effort to the STEM Investment Council and was one of the primary investments recommended by this council. But summer's over. Most vacations are over, and we're ready to roll up our sleeves and work on implementation. We've got the strategies. We've got a huge no-do gap, right, in the system as a whole. We know what needs to happen, and it's a matter right now of really finding ways that we can accelerate the implementation of the changes that we seek. We've got some, I think, I'm not quite sure when I do know when our last meeting was, but Salam Noor was freshly on board at the Department of Education, and Laura Roach will be saying a little bit more about some of the adjustments that are being made, and he is a very, very strong supporter of CTE and STEM work. Lindsay Capps will speak a little bit to the changes that happened with Senate Bill 215 and the Office of the Chief Education Office. The Chief Education Office now is no longer the OEIB, and the implications of that and the relationship with the governor's office. So I'm not going to go too much further, but I did want to let the council know that we've got a series of reports from the previous investments that were aggregated by the Department of Education. I will make sure that I send a link around to folks. I sent a link to some of the videos last night or the night before, and I will send you a link to the direct reports so that you can look at those at your leisure. But one of the things that I believe that we'll need to focus on in the year ahead is making stronger connections between this council and the investments that you're recommending. So we can talk about in terms of next steps, but it would be wonderful, I think, to get our STEM hubs who are doing just tremendous work out in the field to be coming on a regular basis or presenting from a distance, depending on where they reside in the state, and just making much stronger linkages between this council and the work in the field. It's nice, Steve, to have you on this call. I know that there's tremendous work that's also being done by those who did not receive funding. So There's a lot of ripple effects in the system right now of the investments that we made this last biennium, and we'll need to capitalize on those going forward.
Okay. Thank you. Good update. Questions? Let's get a little bit of a bigger picture view from Lindsay as the number of changes have occurred. So Lindsay, you want to come to the table and join us and kind of give us your perspective on what's going on down in Salem? And
Sit over there so I can see
yeah.
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you, Jim, for the opportunity to be here today, and to the rest of the council. I think Mark said it best when he said there's a lot of implementation to do. We're very sorry to have the retirement of Nancy Golden as the Chief Education Officer. She has really, in her short time, and we were lucky to have her for the time we did, help map out a vision and a set of key strategies to achieve critical student outcomes. And one of those critical pieces was obviously the work of this council in supporting STEM education. So a lot of that work is in front of us now, and especially with, I think, what was a very successful legislative session with regard to moving forward some of those key strategies as we think about achieving our state's 40-40-20 goal and helping students navigate those key transitions. Some of the examples of that are $100 million invested in early learning. We have additional investment in strategies around getting more college coursework accessible to more students across the state and high school. We expanded the Opportunity Grant to allow 16,000 more students access to post-secondary education in the state. All of these things are really intended to add strategic focus to our work and give students the opportunity to succeed and complete high school, college, and be career ready. Now, of course, one of the big pieces of that I didn't mention is the work around CTE and STEM. And I think that's one of the things the governor is extremely excited about. As Mark mentioned, it may not be doubling STEM investment, but we certainly doubled overall STEM and CTE investment this session. But as the governor talks about it, it's not enough. We wanted more investment in this work. She will continue to push for more investment in this work, and I think that's one of the critical places that this council plays a role. And so I know we'll have more ongoing conversation about that as we move into subsequent legislative sessions beginning in 2016 as well. As far as where the governor's priorities stand at this point in time, I think there's a real focus now on implementation. As I mentioned, some of those key programs and investments, that's where a lot of our focus is going to be. And the legislature has given us, across state agencies, quite a bit of work to do, which is good work in terms of thinking about student success in a number of different ways, from closing the opportunity gap to providing, as this council is focused on, more applied experiential learning opportunities that are really help us to ensure that more students complete high school and go on to college or career. As far as I think the work that you all are engaged in, I would just touch on a couple of things that we think are priorities. One is continued focus on equity. These learning opportunities have to be available to more students of color, to women. This is a critical priority for this governor across the board in any policy area, but it's certainly important in expanding the access within STEM to these students and low-income students as well. I think we're continuing to think through, and I think the talents and leadership of this council will be helpful in thinking about the integration of CTE and STEM. And these have been sort of separate program areas that have been implemented somewhat differently, and I think we're at the agency level thinking about how we better integrate those in terms of how they're carried out in the field. And that will be ongoing work that I know Mark and I will be engaged with, along with Salam Noor as the Deputy Superintendent, Laura Roach, who's here today. Another piece, the third piece, is really leveraging the STEM hubs. I was very excited to see investment in STEM hubs that I think will allow us to deepen the work for those that exist and expand the number of STEM hubs around the state. I think that's important for a number of reasons. Certainly it's for making sure that we're getting resources into the hands of students and that we're expanding these learning opportunities. The other piece is to provide a feedback loop for this council itself to think about what are the barriers that we see in the field and how do we address those, either through policy or through investment. So I think thinking about that critical link, and we'll obviously be bringing more partners on board with, I think, at least 2 additional STEM hubs. Mark can correct me, going forward. The last piece, I think, is really the critical relationship between the STEM Investment Council and the governor. In assuming my role as the acting chief education officer, we've now merged the policy advisor and the chief education officer, which creates a pretty seamless line of connection. And so I think she'll be wanting to hear from all of you, and I'll be looking forward to working with all of you in sort of capturing your unique perspective and expertise around how we can improve delivery of STEM around the state and where our critical focus needs to be going forward. And I know there'll be a number of policy conversations that will emerge in this regard where we will really be looking forward to this body playing a critical role. As far as just sort of some work ahead as we think about implementation, I'll just focus on two critical areas. One will be to continue to convene agency staff in thinking through implementation. The governor's office and the governor herself is very interested in how the dollars will be allocated across both STEM and CTE, and so I will be playing a leadership role on her behalf in that conversation. The second conversation, I think, is continuing where we left off this last legislative session, and there's a great coalition of industry leaders and other education leaders that are really have been critical to just even advancing the investment strategy we achieved this last session. There's more work to do. The governor wants more investment in these programs and in expanding these learning opportunities. So continuing that important dialogue with that coalition. So I look forward to convening leaders there as well as here at the council level to continue that conversation. And hopefully there are some things that we can do as early as 2016 to advance the work. Last thing, in my acting role as Chief Education Officer, one of the critical things I know we have to do is fill some vacancies on this council. And so that will be one of my first priorities, is to work with you to fill perhaps these 2 seats that we look at here, just symbolically as needing to be filled, to bring some additional leadership to this council.
Great.
So, thank you again, Jim, and for all of you for the time today.
So let's open up to questions that you might have. Questions? Aubrey?
Okay, I'll ask one question.
Well, you've never been shy. That's why you're on this council.
Wow.
I'm just amazed that there's no question. So how do you see this relationship between the governor's office and the education office going forward? And how can we best be impactful given that ecosystem?
Well, that's a great question. So I think one of the things that the Chief Education Office has always done, whether it was the Chief Education Office or the Oregon Education Investment Board, was to really be thinking from a high level about how we reach the 40-40-20 goals. That's at the bottom line, that's exactly what it's supposed to do. So all the strategies that have been developed thus far that I talked about today had their origination or genesis in the policy leadership that the Chief Education Office has provided. We won't be working with a board going forward, which means there's a much more direct relationship between the governor and what her vision is for education in the state. But I think, in short, it's going to be a very close working relationship. And that's not only an expectation of, quite frankly, the law in this state. This is a group that's been set up to advise the Chief Education Officer, but I think it's a really important interconnection that we have to maintain, and so I'm really committed to that.
So not to put you on the spot, but as the governor indicated, is this a long-term position for you as an interim, or is this a short-term in terms of are they going to go out and start recruiting for the Chief Education Officer?
Given the number of strategies we're now working to move from sort of design and implementation by the legislature to now moving out into the field, I think our main focus right now is continuity.
Okay.
And we've got a good team across agencies and within the Chief Education Office. So I think the focus is on getting this work moving and doing it in ways that it's effective so that we can then be thinking about additional scale up and investment. No, I don't have a short answer on what the timeline would be for
Yeah, you could do
replacement.
two jobs.
So she will let me know probably in my lifetime, would be my guess.
Could you speak to how the governor sees effectively embedding inclusion into all of the education work?
So I would say, I would take it a step higher, and that is that she is prioritizing that within her own team, and that there are a number of policy folks who have been elevated to policy advisor roles to be both thinking inwardly across state agencies about inclusion and diversity, and making sure that we have leadership that's reflective of our population in the state. The other part is working within business and industry to think about ways that we expand what we traditionally called minority-owned businesses and other things like that. I think there are better terms for that. And then the last piece is really putting a focus on equity across policy areas, whether it's education or healthcare. But that wasn't your question. So the question is around education, and I think this is something that we will embed in all of our work across state agencies. All of the agency directors are committed to implementing the equity lens, which was created through the Chief Education Office originally. And as far as we kind of where we really have the impact is through resource allocation. My intent would be that the Chief Education Office plays a role in the budget process to use the equity lens as well as other sort of return on investment lenses to look at the strategies that each of the agencies comes forward with for this next budget round, so that we're thinking about, again, prioritization of resources based on our overall goal of 40-40-20, as well as ensuring that we're doing it with an eye toward traditionally underserved and underrepresented students. That's the heart of the work. Equity is the foundation of the work in education. I think you would hear that across the system, and we have to reflect that in our policymaking.
Given the education ecosystem in Oregon with all the different school districts, we can find great programs, but how do you see us driving those programs across the entire state so we get the kind of outcomes we're looking for? We can find great things and good programs that are producing real results. Thompson has some examples of that, others have, but they're not systemic across our system. They're here and there. How do you see us ultimately scaling this up so we get everyone the opportunities that we're kind of seeing are working and are producing real results?
There may be an answer in your question, which is I think that's the role of this group, is to be thinking about, from your unique perspective, and when I say that, you all are involved in industry, and I think that's a really important lens to bring to this work. And so I think as you can advise us through Mark's work and certainly me and the governor, that's I think you've named the.
Well, we need
one of
some
our
help.
roles.
I was going to say, we can tell you lots of good ideas, but
Yeah.
unless we can get someone to catch it, we can do a lot of throwing here. But
Well,
you
I'll
know.
go back to my earlier comment, which is I think we're looking for that.
Okay.
And so I think there's going to be
We'll
a real
have that.
connection to that. And I think we have to marry that as well with the work that I think we're seeing through the STEM hubs and what practitioners are doing in the field. And that's a critical integration. And I think that's work that probably hasn't been achieved in any other area. And so I think it's exciting to see how we do that integration. But again, I think, I'm not passing the buck back to you because the buck ultimately resides with us.
Well, ultimately, the
but-
Department of Education sends money out. They have to create expectations, and we got to hold people accountable to getting the kind of outcomes we're looking for. We can come up with a lot of great ideas and good programs that
Right.
produce real results, but
Yeah.
how other people adopt those programs is ultimately
Yeah.
the secret sauce here, because we're not seeing that necessarily happen. We're seeing pockets of really good excellence and things that are producing great results, but we're not
Yeah.
seeing them broadly accepted or adopted across the system. And the Department of Education, and I assume your office, can help do that.
Yep.
In terms of creating expectations, and maybe I know it's like a carrot or stick here, but carrots only work so long. At some point, you got to get some reason to people to change. So
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation, not only to have here, but also with the deputy superintendent, who I know the governor has utmost confidence in, and I think understands this very question.
Yeah.
So as we continue to work together across agencies, we'll keep that focus in mind.
I have one more question.
And if I could, well, could I just comment on that just briefly?
I'm going to tell you no, but
No, I'm sharing this.
Chair, with your permission, Chair.
Okay, Mark. Just gonna kick
I just wanted to say that, one of the critical investment strategies is the hubs, and one of their roles is to do exactly that, to provide a mechanism and relationships to scale what works, to highlight what works, and to distribute that across the broader system as a whole, and to then feedback. And we're also developing a different kind of relationship between the state and the field that we're trying to be putting forward with regional achievement collaboratives and these hubs, so that we're building that confidence and trust and leadership at appropriate places within the system, with ODE, with the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, with the Early Learning Division, and how do those agencies create the conditions and the cultures necessary for those innovations to occur and to support the field, because they know what works. And so it's really enabling them and creating those conditions and supports necessary to do that. So,
thank you. So at what level, what time do you bring the nonprofits and in particular the philanthropy folks into this conversation, recognizing that funding for a lot of this infrastructure work and these programmatic elements are important, and given that it's usually the foundations and the nonprofit folks that actually work heavily in the equity area, right?
Yeah.
So we have all these different things that are not really connected. So I'm looking at how do you actually tie those things together, particularly around dollars and cents, to make sure that they're accessible and available throughout the entire continuum of implementation.
Yeah, I think those philanthropic relationships and community-based partnerships are really important across the board, but especially here. I think obviously a clear connection is probably most directly within the STEM hub structures as they're making decisions around the work and resource allocation. Certainly a place where we can be reaching out now to those organizations and philanthropic. I just spoke with the Oregon Community Foundation about our overall education agenda, and this was a topic that was on that list. So we're in engagement with some of the foundations, but I think we can probably deepen the work around community-based organizations. And the other thing that I would say on that point is as we are developing ongoing policy, I think we have to keep a broad table engaged in these conversations, because the lift is going to be all of us doing this. So, I think we'll be using the auspices of the Chief Education Office to do more convening of a broader set of voices within the system that are critical to our success. So.
Eric?
Yeah, give me enough time, I'll think of a question. Statement. Question. Obviously, over the last 8-10 months, there's been a number of conversations, trial balloons, straw man proposals around the merging of STEM and CTE interests into a single commission, council, whatever you want to call it. Because there's obviously the synergies we all recognize, but that has quieted down significantly. That effort seemed to have been led from one quadrant of the legislature. Is that an area where the governor's office and the chief education office should take some level of leadership of either saying yes or no, so that we put that issue to bed once and for all from the top, as opposed to watching this continue to percolate amongst some of the folks who have good ideas but maybe are only focused on it for seconds of the day, as opposed to their entire careers?
So I think, first off, our position coming into the legislative session and as these conversations are on sort of a joint CTE STEM council we're supportive of that, in part because this was a conversation that this group had, and I think it given some direction that they thought that was a good thing. As happens within legislative processes, things get complex and issues emerge, and you say, well, boy, do we have time to figure this out within the heat of this process and within the time that we have. So I really think that's unfinished work. I do, and I think Mark would agree with this, look to Senator Dembro as a partner in that conversation. I haven't connected with him post-session about what his intentions are, but I think it's a conversation we need to have. And it goes back to, I think, where we're going to put some priority focus in terms of implementation and ongoing policy development, which is that integration. So if you have a governance structure that matches that, so much the better. But I imagine there are a number of issues that we need to work through in making that work.
It seems to me it's a leadership issue, somebody owning that topic and driving it either to conclusion. I don't care each way where it goes, it just needs to be put to bed. And that seems like that's going to take some authority to drive that to conclusion, where Senator Dembrow, I think, is very much a partner and very interested, but he doesn't necessarily have the authority to drive it to a conclusion. And your office probably does.
Sure. I get your point.
Yeah. Perfect.
Thank you.
Maybe one more question. You look 3 to 4 years from now, we've obviously got a foot in the door on this, but the resources we have towards CTE and STEM and really changing the educational system are paltry compared to the demand of the system. How do you see this playing out in terms of the allocation of resources and dollars to actually scale up these programs? Keep coming back to this issue of scale, because at the end of the day, if we don't have the resources to fund these things, people will say, great idea, but I need to update my school, I need to upgrade my teachers, I need to upgrade my instruction, and that's not inexpensive to do. You can build scale, you could build best practices, but ultimately we're going to need more resources compared to what other states are spending. We're well low on that. So do you see your office kind of championing that and with the governor to try to raise more money in this space to in a very difficult budget cycle? Because I think at the end of the day, people are excited about this, but at the end of the day, there's going to be an ask, and the question is, how do we fulfill that ask?
And obviously, STEM is a cost-intensive initiative, and especially as we think about that, as you mentioned, from what assets currently exist and what sort of capital do we need to bring in, as well as the instructional side of this. And so one of the conversations we started this session was, how do we get dedicated, sustained funding? The governor's very fond of the fact that this is more than just interstate rivalry, but talking about a very similar state just across the river that spends $400 million just in secondary CTE alone, and we see the return on investment in that economy. So when we say we double CTE and STEM investment this session, we're talking $35 million. It's not enough even to be a foundational investment in this work. So I think it's going to take us thinking together, and it's this council, I think it's the coalition, as I was referencing ongoing work there, because we're going to need to find that source of resource. And we've looked at that a couple of different ways, as you all know. I think the governor's committed to, and has already, I think, had some conversations with various folks directly about how do we work together to create that fund, so that when we talk about things like STEM hubs, or we talk about direct resources on a per student basis out to school districts, that we're actually putting some resource behind that's able for us to get us to a foundational level and then to innovate around the work. So governor feels very strongly about this and will be one of her key priorities.
Good. Well, we definitely want to work with you on that, because without the resources, we can have a lot of discussions, but we got to have, people will follow the resources, and if there's resources to drive this agenda, then I think that things can change. So I think Washington's a great example of that. Any last questions of the council? Okay. Lindsay, thank you so much for coming. We look forward to continuing working with you, and look forward to a couple new members on this to help fill out our team. And best of wishes in your double role now, so you can talk to yourself now. You have an issue on policy. Frequently. Who am I talking about? The policy guy or the chief of education? Thank you, and thanks for the governor's support on this. So, all righty, good. Good. Thanks, Lindsay. Okay, next topic on the agenda, we're pretty much on schedule, is kind of a review of the legislative changes that occurred, and I know there's a little bit of dialogue via email on this issue, but I think Mark kind of gave us some good thoughts and ideas, and so I'm going to turn this to Mark to kind of lead this short discussion on this item.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Given I think some probing at the end of the session there, and we're seeing the $12.5 million or $12.3 million, and where is it going, and how is it getting into the field, and what's our role as a council in further guiding those investments and ensuring that we're achieving the results that they were intended to do. I think that those kinds of questions are really critical for us to do. As we've jumped right in, we started talking about a charter and what our roles and responsibilities were, and then we quickly pivoted to what's out there, what's in the ecosystem, what recommendations should we make going into the legislative session, and got really pulled in many different directions. So this is a really opportune time for us to revisit both the legislation as well as the implications of that legislation, and to try to bring additional clarity to what the various appropriate roles of using the talents and perspectives of this council. How do we best do that, right? And then, identify questions or issues or areas that we need to resolve, that we may need Lindsay's support, Salam Noor's support, Ben Cannon's support, to try to clarify where does this council fit in and engage around the implementation work. So what I've done is, in front of you there will be a stapled piece of paper that's a STEM Investment Council roles and responsibilities as a draft, and I tried to put this into 3 sections. One is, what does the legislation say for us, very explicitly. I did modify some of the wording, but I wanted to keep the intent of the legislation clear in the bullets. And then the second was implications of that for our roles. In order to get that work done, that's part of our charge. What do we have to do, and what places do we connect in that? And then very specific on the final page is very specific conversation about not all of the high-level stuff, but the investments in particular. And so I'd like to start out on the first page, though, and just give us an opportunity to read through those and then have a conversation about that and what questions come up or clarifications are needed. And then we'll move to the second and then to the third, going from high into more specific. If we could just take 5 minutes to read all that and then have a conversation. Yeah, and if anybody wants the specific bills, copies of the bills of 2636 or 3072, they're here and available.
Okay. Good.
Yep.
You ready?
All right.
Just jump into this.
Yep.
Any comments or questions on the first page in terms of concerns or clarifications or points we want to make in terms of either our charge or our legislative responsibilities?
Yeah, just one brief one, and I think it was what led to some of the consternation in the email strings that fired off in earlier this summer was around Section 7 of the statute.
2636.
Yeah, 2636, which is the creation of the STEM Investment Grant Program and the funding thereof, and responsibilities of this council to get more hands-on, so to speak, with the allocation of dollars as opposed to the recommendation of just STEM policy. So I think obviously from the emails, there was continuing hope or desire to see dollars actually flow into that bucket before it flows down to other buckets. Obviously, as an industry council and folks who are very used to having some level of control in regards to the things they're held accountable for, I think that was some of the issues I have, is that without that level of hands-on authority, how can we be rated as a council in regards to what's being done for STEM across the state? An advisor without power is just an advisor.
One more voice in the wind.
Sharing opinion, yeah. So I think that was the concern. Obviously, I understand the situation after being down in the legislature the whole time in regards to why the money flowed the way it flowed to the different direct agencies as opposed through this council. I guess the question and the concern I have in regards to that portion is if we did have dollars in that grant program, the ability for this council to do additional work that costs money might be a little bit easier to do. We have basically no budget control to be able to do things like we've been discussing in the marketing committee about putting together a strategic communications plan and those types of actions. So I don't know what to say other than this is an area that we need to figure out as a council. Are we going to continue to push for Section 7 inclusion in this council's duties? Or are we going to just say, no, we'll let the money flow the other direction? My opinion is we need some level of dollars in there, or we need to get it removed from the law. And I think that's supported by a number of legislators that wrote this law. They continue to be somewhat dumbfounded that the money isn't flowing through this, because one of their hopes was to have the money flow through this so that there would be some level of outside oversight on these dollars and accountability on these dollars. So that's, I'm off my high horse at this point.
I think that was the point I was trying to raise and highlight, because I think there was a, we didn't follow it that closely, and I think Mark was trying to lead us that direction. We may have not caught the essence of that, but it is a question of how do we fund the work that needs to be done in this area to move this forward. And we have influence, but we don't necessarily have authority.
Well, and that's when you start talking about, we talked about this in the communications committee, when you talk about if we keep our role at the very highest level where we're only trying to influence agency directors, governor, legislature, we probably don't need a large budget. But the moment we drop down into the districts at any level, right, we need budget, because now you've expanded your market from a very small tight one to a massive beast. And right now we have no budget to deal with the beast. So our marketing efforts and our communication efforts are pretty much limited to a small group.
Other council members, comments, thoughts on this page?
Well, where it says, on the second element in the second bullet, it says that we'll oversee things, we'll basically address things overseen by the Oregon Education Investment Board, which no longer exists.
Yeah.
So what does that mean now?
The law has then been modified by Senate Bill 215 to change that language to the Chief Education Office. I left it in there to make sure that there was no confusion, but causing more confusion perhaps.
That's been edited. Okay.
Yeah, that's been edited appropriately in two places actually, in House Bill 3072 as well as in Senate Bill 215, as well as Senate Bill 216 and Senate Bill 217.
So again, I think if you look at the appropriations we did work with, obviously the STEM hubs, I'm not too concerned, right? I think that's an obvious direct funding stream going into ODE that can be pretty confident that there's going to be enough eyes on it, enough work, and enough establishment. My concern would be without new dollars, if we're going to try to do anything disruptive or new or significant, that's where we have to be able to take the risk and take the risk off of others who, by their DNA and their nature, aren't going to be in that position to do that kind of work. And that's why advisory boards, specifically industry's advisory boards, can be very powerful is because the risk, it puts the fall guy is us, not people that are doing this for their livelihoods. So anyhow, I would encourage us to think about this because as we come around the bend to February in the short session, it would be the opportunity to clarify the law and make any nuanced changes to the law that we would wish to either strengthen or remove Section 7.
And I think I'm going to add that this is an equity issue as well, in that ensuring that dollars are put into projects and programs and areas that positively impact access to STEM for more diverse populations. The opportunity's always been there for investment to happen, it just hasn't. So, at the end of the day, and I don't mean from a programmatic perspective, because there are pockets of investments that are happening throughout the entire ecosystem. But we're talking about a strategic level, where we're now talking about how we actually ensure equity across the entire spectrum. And in some cases, it's going to be helpful to be able to put dollars behind that are targeted specifically for, in some cases, the development of infrastructure that supports equity. In other cases, the programs or pilots could be examples of where equity could be implemented on a larger basis, but is not really focused or tied to a larger strategy. So being able to say that not only we have the focus on equity, we have the ability to facilitate interventions in certain cases by the application of dollars we might have control over. So, on one level, we're talking about how important equity is, but then we actually leave it to somebody else to actually ensure that the dollars are flowing. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think that we can help in this perspective in that we are looking from that strategic level, and in some cases we may have a better perspective from working with this strategy across multiple disciplines as opposed to just, in less targeted areas, if that makes sense.
And then last comment would be that industry and about 5 or 6 industry groups led the STEM conversation down in Salem around getting increases in dollars. I think we have to be careful because many of those industry groups and folks really believed that they were empowering the STEM Council to make those investments directly, or at least have full authority on those investments. And I think we've surprised some of our constituents now that we don't. And I don't think we're going to alienate industry, but if industry wants something implemented now, there's not a way of getting it done other than going to the particular agencies that have the dollars who already may have a plan associated with those dollars. There's no flexibility at this time for implementation on those dollars. And I know that some of the folks are concerned that they've lost the voice. They set this up, they go to Salem, they go get more money for what they thought this was doing, and realize now that it's not necessarily in their control or it have any influence on where the dollars actually end up. And that risks alienating a group that I think had tremendous impact in regards to getting any of the increases that we got.
So the money right now sits at the Oregon Department of Education, as I understand it, and so you've had conversations with Salam on how that, at least the innovative dollars, I think the hub dollars, I would agree with you. I think we've got a plan, I think we know what works there, and we still need to be accountable. We need to ensure that they meet the requirements and attributes that we're looking for. But have you had a conversation with Salam on how he sees those innovation grants and how he sees the STEM Council participate? Obviously, this is more of a kind of a agreement between the two of us on how we would work together, because clearly they have the authority to on how the dollars get allocated. And how does he see STEM Council supporting or advising him on those grants?
Yeah, I think that we can get to some of the very specific details in later in this document. Goes through the various pieces of this. I'd love some guidance from this group about. I'm a bit confused. Because it seems to me that we were very specific in the recommendations that we were making. We wanted to expand the implementation of the STEM hubs, and we wanted to increase that so that every district in the state had an opportunity to participate in a STEM hub, and to increase, to build this network of communication, of feedback to the system, and then implementation of best practices, and that those locally implemented regional initiatives
I don't think
were
there's any
largely
question about STEM hubs.
Okay, so the role of the council in regard to the STEM hubs was A, supporting the expansion, but B, then to oversee and engage with that work, to take feedback and reports from those regions, and then drive additional investment and policy recommendations to overcome barriers in the system that they're seeing. So it was a form of business intelligence as well as an implementation mechanism for this council to affect a larger ecosystem. With respect to the post-secondary supports for students of color, that was a very, very specific recommendation from this council that was to then complement. Originally, it was connected to the ETIC dollars, that these were two pieces of a strategy in the post-secondary space. One, to recruit, retain, and support students of color. Two, to provide incentives to the system to create programs that were connected to high-wage, high-demand jobs. And those were complementary efforts. That's still the case. It's very still specific. And we'll talk a little bit more about that particular one in just a minute. To the innovation dollars, this council put forward 4 things. Well, 3. Mathematics was that was the biggest barrier in the system from a content perspective. And this council suggested 2 strategies in regards to that. One is professional development geared around contextualization, connection to industry, helping educators understand how mathematics connects to the real world, so that we're not boring kids to death, we're deepening their understanding. It's applied mathematics professional development. That makes an awful lot of sense. And then to the second part of mathematics is, why aren't we using technology more effectively to help support educators with adaptive learning technologies that exist right now in the mathematics space that could enable them to increase student attainment in that regard. So that was one specific under the innovation grants. The second specific thing that the innovation grants from this council recommended was that we increase a focus on computer science, digital literacy, and design thinking, particularly in grades 4 through 8. Third was to focus on out-of-school programs to make sure that we're supporting the ecosystem that's surrounding the formal education system, recognizing that this is a tremendous opportunity not only to address equity issues, equity and access issues for many of our underserved communities and underserved students, to connect them to the opportunities that those who have the financial means, whether it's visiting a beach, whether it's going to OMSI, whether it's visiting John Day. So all of that has been conveyed to that, all of that intent and all of that thinking and all of that reasoning that this council put into those recommendations has been conveyed to the agencies, and is very clearly going to be a piece of the criteria that go behind the grants that then go out the door. The missing piece that I'm hearing from this council, so there's oversight responsibilities here for us to be looking at those investments. What is the return on the investments? What are the criteria behind those for selection to ensure that the agencies are implementing them in a manner that is consistent with the will of this council? That's an important piece for this consideration.
That's the crux of the question we're asking here is, how do we trust but verify that the agency, all the work that we did is going to actually get spent in an appropriate manner?
Right.
So that's where we will talk later on about where do we.
But Eric, I would go beyond being spent.
Yeah.
That we actually know that it produced results. Because at the end of the day, it's about, we're going to be held accountable for the fact that we've moved a needle. And the problem is that we have no idea whether or not we are moving a needle and that we're actually having an impact. And unless we're able to articulate that,
Right.
there's no way that we will ever be able to increase any funding. So we have to demonstrate results, and the concern here is that without that accountability designed from the get-go, with an evaluation defined at the end, we will not have any ability to go back to them and say, look, your faith in us delivered results. We want more faith because we want increased funding because this is working. So we've got the real concern, it's a very legitimate concern, that we're going into a system that is not necessarily designed around the same criteria of results that we're looking
This
for
council
from this
was formed
council.
by.
That's well said. I think that's exactly.
That's absolutely it. And again, going back to why the STEM Investment Council was formed, why ETIC was formed, is because there is some level of disruptive investment that industry is looking for into the system. And it's tough. I mean, because if I put myself inside the agencies, I would be just like, just let me do my job. You know, come on, I'm the professional here. Just give me some dollars, and I'll make you proud, right? That's fine, and I trust that, and we have good people. But how do we verify it? How do we make it move forward? How do we stop something when it's going off the rails before it goes off the rails? How do we amplify those things that work? And how do we believe it enough as a council that I'm going to be willing to sit in front of the legislature and put my reputation on the line asking for more?
So I'm going to actually challenge even further, Eric, what you said before, that the STEM hubs are working. Well, they're going to be working at different levels. This was an experiment. That means that we went out there and said, hey, we don't really know what we're doing, let's start. Well, we have to learn what's working and what's not working, and to amplify what's not working, and to help guide away from what's not working. That's the nature of the innovation process. And so the ability for us to be adaptive and innovative requires us to understand what is effective in this process, because we're seeking a systemic change. We have to have visibility of what parts are working and how do we help encourage best practices in the hubs, and what's not been working, and say, okay, that didn't work as well. That ability of visibility, without that, we will not have any ability to adapt and to improve. And now we're creating more system funding.
Yeah.
So your last point would be, we've got good people, good partners, there's no doubt about it, but ultimately the legislation has to back up when you get a bad partner and you get a bad person in a position. That's where you always find yourself. Over 18 years, ETIC had to go back to the law a number of different times because things started to go sideways. And so one of the concerns I have here is we are foregoing a huge piece of what the intent of this council was in Section 7. And so I just would like some clarity there. And it may be that we don't want to run dollars through us, because I can appreciate the complexity of doing that, right? Staff, the whole 9 yards. But if we're not going to do it, then maybe we remove 7 or do something to 7, and we strengthen some of the verbiage other places in 2636. That would give us the confidence that we do have some level of accountability at a different level.
And I'd add one piece to that, and actually 2 pieces. Number one, does the Department of Education, do their outcomes align with ours? In other words, if we are talking strategy 40-40-20, and we're talking about doubling the number of STEM students, do they have the same requirements? Okay, because if they do, and they are the executors of the strategy we're talking about, then we can actually develop some processes and policies that actually allow them to be able to deliver on the things that we're responsible for. I have less issues around if that's the case. However, the challenge and the opportunity is that there may be interventions that are necessary to actually get us there that may go against the standard operating procedures in the agencies we're talking about, recognizing that they may even want to have the changes we're talking about, but they don't really have a good way to actually have them happen. So us having the dollars to be able to help with those interventions and have the strategic view to be able to facilitate those interventions, and to Thompson's point, to be able to give cover for the people that are actually trying things out that may actually fail and still be able to move on, is something that we can do from that strategy level, as opposed to being in a system where you fail once, then that project is done and all the dollars and people go away. Right.
Yeah.
I can give you a number of experiences I've had with higher education where obviously a best practice is known, and we're trying to Xerox that best practice throughout other institutions and things like that. The nature of the beast is each institution is going to want to create their own one-off and have a tremendous amount of say. When sometimes the best practice is known. Let's just Xerox this thing. We don't have a lot of money. We just need to boom, 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 right?
Yeah.
I can tell you, for example, on the piece that we got for higher education, I am very concerned that a majority of that money is going to be consumed already doing something that's been done 15 times, thinking about this problem. There is some best practices that a small group could probably evaluate very quickly and say, look, all $2 million needs to go for the implementation of X, not spending $1.5 million figuring out what Y is and spending $500,000 on implementing Y. And that's the nature of the beast. It just is in higher ed. They're going to want to study it before they do anything with it, right? And the fact is, we're not about studying some of this stuff. Some of this stuff is known. We need to get the money to the classrooms, money to the students. And I would argue that even in K through 12, if you talk to many teachers, they're like, stop dealing with it up here, get the money to my classroom. And that, without the authority, I'm just fearful, horribly fearful that we're just dumping it into a bucket and it's just going to get. So, I don't know what we do about it. It's out there, and we're not going to be able to change it as a council members. This requires partners in the legislature, partners in the agencies, and partners in the governor's office.
And an example of that is that when the rules were published, the fiscal agents are only educational institutions. There are no community partners that are qualified as fiscal agents under the rules that I've seen.
For the hubs?
No, for the STEM grants.
You're
I
saying-
don't believe that's
I mean, the
true, but
Department of
let me-
Education can
I'll
only.
share the set of rules that I've seen that were published.
Okay.
So that if you had a community foundation who wanted to participate in partnership with the business community and their schools, that would not qualify as a fiscal agent under the published rules. They aren't published. They're the what are they called? The
Administrative rules.
Yeah.
Yeah, the current version of those. The hearing for that is at the end of this month.
Yes.
But the ones that have been released in draft form,
I've not seen the ones for.
Grants.
I will follow
I'll
up
share
directly
with
with that
you
because
what
I've been
I-
working very closely with the folks at the Department of Education
Okay.
to ensure that language has been updated and changed. So I'd be surprised and have some additional work to do should that be the case.
Okay.
So we did recognize that in and thanks to the folks in Southern Oregon, that one of the changes that was proposed and is in law regarding ESDs being legitimate fiscal agents for the ESDs was changed in many places, but not in one place.
Okay.
And we'll be working to ensure that is called out for the state board and becomes part of the temporary rules. So if there's other places where that is not true, I would be, it would be very helpful to do so, because I think that the rules that we have, the changes in rules right now only cover the hubs. So the intent was to roll out additional rules changes in the future. And Laura, do you have any comment on that regarding whether
I
anything will
didn't
move forward?
exactly hear the piece, but the rules right now are out for hearing, and that's exactly the reason they are, so that people can read them, and if they have comments, they bring them back to us, and we have the opportunity to deal with that before they go to the State Board of Education. It's been a complex event to have our attorneys attempt to draft the rules and have them do what we wanted done under the old rules and find a way to do that and create new rules. So in that level of complexity, it's possible that something was missed, but it's not a done deal. So,
Have rules been proposed for investments beyond the STEM hubs, for any of the STEM investments beyond the STEM hubs?
I didn't think so, but it
I
could.
didn't think so
I
either.
didn't think so, but I haven't seen anything published, so it may be
Yeah.
that they have
Right.
put out the the rules for the hearing, and I just didn't see, I've been out this week.
Yeah.
So,
I believe, Thompson, that the rules governing the last biennium's STEM, CTE, STEAM grants did have educational institutions as being the fiscal agents. But that is something that we would be modifying for these innovation grants.
well, this was
That's necessary.
created by, August 14th of this year.
Wow.
And it's a fiscal agent for CTE and STEM grants.
Hmm.
And it's available under 5810170301. And school districts, ESDs, public schools, charter schools, community colleges, and public universities.
So that may be the case that it's those rules specifically are. So one of the confusing pieces is that we're using CTE and STEM in both the CTE investments and the STEM investments. And so it could be that that particular OAR is in reference to the CTE revitalization. But
Okay.
that may be, I
just
will
think
look
that-
into
I just
that.
think that this is,
Yeah.
to Eric's point, is that the rules are a critical piece of the puzzle.
Right.
Because quickly, once those rules get approved, we're going to be flipping around the RFPs on those.
Yes.
And if those rules are not at least aligned with our intention as a STEM council, and it's like the specifications on a new product, right? If those specs are not according,
Right.
we're not going to get what we
Yeah.
need. And so this is a very critical piece for us to be laser-like, because we would hate to have another surprise.
Yeah.
Do those rules all suggest what the role of the STEM council is in the grant program? They don't.
They
No.
do not. They're
They don't.
governing other aspects of it specific to the field.
Just the
and
field.
who's eligible to apply, what are the definitions
So-
that are going to be used, et cetera.
One point to clarify, I'm not advocating for this council to read grants.
Okay.
Okay, there's too much work, we're not professional educators. But at some juncture in my previous roles, those grant recommendations would flow to this council. And they would get the 3 easy questions asked of them. And if they failed to answer any of the 3 easy questions, then the questions got brutal. You have to run it through the BS filter, so to speak, to make sure that it's in alignment and everything looks like it had been done appropriately by, it's just an accountability issue. And then we would vote, put our name on the decision,
Yeah.
and then be accountable for that work, which kept the council asking questions every quarter, every year about what those investments were. I fear because we're outside of that linkage is still there. It may be there, but it may not be with the same sense of urgency.
Well, let's talk more about that when we get into the details, because I believe from Salam Noor that there's a great willingness to engage with the council, while also recognizing that we want to balance that, the trust and verified pieces, and I know that there's a lot of relationship building that also needs to occur here, so that trust is actually established with our agencies. Without slowing down the investment. So that's the critical piece, knowing that we need to have that accountability built into this system. Absolutely. And so some places we should probably be going slower this biennium. And in some places, like the current STEM hubs, we're going a little faster because we've heard from you that, yay, this is a good investment, get the money out the door to the folks so they
Again,
can continue to the work.
Last word on this is that's great when you have working partners, but contracts are in place when things don't work, not when they do work.
Right.
And that's ultimately what we don't have in our favor, is that we don't have a contract in the form of at least how things are acting,
Yeah.
that we can fall back on when things don't work.
So that's what I'm suggesting, is that we have very specific agreements about the roles that we negotiate with the chief education officer and the head of agencies, any pertinent agencies, including HEC and ODE, around where that
So
exists.
in lieu, one of the recommendations would be in lieu of direct authority and direct contracts, lots of memos of understanding where people actually put their names down on the bottom of pieces of paper where they're in agreement.
Mhm.
That can be exhibit A, B, and C when things actually don't occur. I can tell you from my experience as well that those pieces of paper are remarkably difficult to get out of agencies, right? Because nobody wants to have that evidence. So it's great.
Yeah.
We can have all the great conversations, handshakes in the world, but unless we have a memo or an email or a smoking gun that says this is actually what we're going to do, again, my confidence level shrinks dramatically.
I think-
And I think that this is a really important point, that why this is so important is that if we don't establish this relationship of trust and alignment and have it articulated in, could be, very simple MOU, then we don't have the credibility at the end of the day to be able to align the corporate support that we
Sure.
are going to need for the next political biennium.
Sure.
So this is a critical time over this next 30 days, quite honestly, because the fact is that the OD is in the process of quickly pushing out,
Some, and putting the brakes on others.
putting the brakes on others.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying that
Yeah.
we don't, this is not a conversation for us to kind of push down kick it down the road a little bit.
Right.
This is one that's a very critical conversation for us to establish a relationship of trust and articulate that trust in an MOU. Now, if people are not willing to do that, then we have to actually question our value as a council, quite frankly.
So I have a question. Before the investment board, the education investment board went away, we had, we're building relationships with them.
Yeah.
And one of the relationships that we had, at least for me, I was going to be on with the group that actually was giving money out, specifically so I could actually see how they were doing that, what their process was. That was my intent. Okay, so because I wanted to understand just where their priorities were actually, where the rubber met the road as opposed to what was being said. Is there a place where we can still do that, and if so, where is that?
Let me just note that and then respond and answer.
It's okay, you can do one thing at a time.
Thank you. I'm a guy. It's like focus.
Award recognition software.
Take a moment.
Well, I think when we look at the one with the Oregon Education Investment Board, what that outcomes committee of the OEIB was not. They were hearing recommendations from various agencies and elements within the system to get the OEIB's prioritization and support. They did not control the money per se. They made that recommendation, similar to the function of this council. Is they were saying, of this, $2 billion in recommendations, we're going to recommend this $575 million, and push that forward with the governor's office and advocate for that. So that was the function of that committee, which was very similar to the role of this council, quite honestly. I think one of the things that you've mentioned is how do we strengthen the relationships with agencies, and the agencies are asking for this as well. So they're saying, hey, wait a minute, the council's going to make these recommendations and they expect us just to jump. How can we participate in those deliberations so that we are truly operating in that ecotone where you've got the experts from the education side of things saying, yeah, that was tried 15 years ago, and there were some really nice things about SimCam, but hey, it needs to look different, and here's why that didn't work. So I think that relationship is a really good one.
To make it perfectly clear, all contract memos of understanding are two-way streets.
Two ways,
Okay?
yes.
Let's make sure that we're putting ourselves on the line as well.
Yeah.
So,
So I think that's a great suggestion.
But I think that is a very, very important tone, that we're not coming in as a demand, that we're talking about a request for a partnership, an explicit partnership for a common goal, which we all want.
I love
So all
that.
we're asking
That's a
is
great
for
language.
that.
That's a great language.
So 7 made it more of a dictatorship, right?
Right, we don't want, we're not dictators.
We're not. 7's not in play, so let's negotiate back down to a benevolent dictatorship.
But it is
or a,
important. I think it is important when you look at
partnership.
what we made some recommendations on how the STEM innovation grant should be allocated, not only in these areas, but also we said 70% on the equity side of it too, and that didn't show up on this list, but that's an important aspect. So
That has been communicated.
It's been communicated. So
that
is there a letter of understanding between Salam and this committee on how have they accepted this charter and this charge, and then how do we work with them in partnership to ensure that those investments are aligned with what the direction of the council is. I think that's what we're looking for in the essence of it. And
Yeah, so Jim, to build off of that, I think what we're talking about here is a model.
Yeah.
Is that what we were looking for is how do we as a business community be able to partner with our resources in government to create around a shared goal? And that our STEM, and so that doesn't mean that we're coming in asking for authority. We're merely coming in to be in that partnership, in that ecotone that you talk about. And so I think that we have a wonderful opportunity here where we can flip this around from something which was not what we thought, to actually potentially create a great model.
better model.
I think
But
that's
much better model for how we really want to be at the table as a partner, co-creating innovative solutions.
No surprises.
for anybody, right?
I mean,
That's really
we would be
fantastic.
shocked if this thing went forward and they did innovation grants not in these areas, not allocated to equity,
That would be
and
bad.
that's what I said. But that would be the no surprise kind of thing
Well,
if it went
and
the wrong
the
direction.
fear that I always have being on these advisory boards, volunteer advisory boards, is the of very busy people. Is the moment you do that once, you may get away with it. The second time around, the board dissolves.
Yeah.
Everybody leaves.
Yeah.
What's the purpose?
A couple of things. I think this is fantastic, okay, and I really love the tone, and there is an action item to draft up sort of a partnership, I guess, framework or a letter.
Memorandum of
that-
understanding.
Well, a memorandum of understanding, I get, we don't want it to be too squishy, right? But it's a clarification of legislative intent and roles in regard to these particular investments and investments going forward, our relationship going forward. The legislation is actually really fairly clear. There's ambiguity and clarity. One is that it makes a very direct statement in 3072 that the Department of Education, that the role of this council is to make specific disbursement recommendations to the Deputy Superintendent of Public Instruction. Okay, so now we could, I guess, have a conversation about what that means. My read was we have given them very specific recommendations. The piece of the system that I think you brought up earlier that we haven't, that is tremendous, is that how do we build flexibility of implementation into this system? There is the trust and accountability piece, which I think we
Flexibility is huge.
have, but the flexibility is not in the system right now. And that is a piece that I think, that we need to be thinking about, to have, whether it's Section 7 and have a fund established, that some is held back and then redispersed. 3072 also sets up a treasury account similar to the one. It's modeled on what was put into our 2636 for connecting to the world of work to govern both the CTE and the STEM investments. So there's another mechanism, and that becomes active in 2017. So without any other changes to the law, future CTE and STEM investments would go to this Connecting to the World of Work fund. We haven't, devil's in the details, there are no OARs to my knowledge around the administrative rules to govern how then that gets out of that treasury fund to agencies and to other places, right?
Trust me, when
But
money,
we can
when
make
money's
that
at play,
happen.
people make it happen. I think that's not the concern.
So the question, I think, is the flexibility, and I think that that's a really
Well,
legitimate one.
And I think that's actually where we can get on the same page with the folks in education, in that typically their budgets are really very focused.
Yeah.
Whereas here, if we have a fund that they know can be deployed to something that was not necessarily in the plan initially, but is a strategic, that fits our strategic intent, we already have an agreement if we have this MOU together of where we can spend some of those dollars. We just go get it and we run it past our group here, and we can help deploy it.
So again, the legislators involved in 2636 in regards to the Section 7 fully had the expectation that all dollars around, all additional dollars, not existing dollars, but any additional dollars flowed into STEM would flow through that account. We need to reset some expectations then. Because I think there's even confusion at the end of this legislative session among some of those people that were even in there making the votes. I think they still believe that the money is coming through this in some regard. So we need to make sure that they understand and that we are, what our plan is in regards to setting up this new, more formal relationship between the providers.
Yeah. And,
Is there a precedent for this? Is there a precedent for this?
In regards to funding?
Well, no,
That went to
a
agency
council like
budgets, yeah.
ours, an advisory council, but also was an investment council, establishing these letters of intent, letters of understanding with this is a known path. Okay.
It's usually done when you hold the big chip,
Okay.
but we don't hold that chip.
Okay.
Okay, well, maybe at the risk of moving a little bit, is there a need, maybe from a process, is there a need to write a letter from the STEM Council to Salam saying, here is our recommendation, here's our intent? We've said these things, we've talked about, but I don't think you could find it anywhere in a document that says this is what we expect and how we want to work to start the dialogue. Because I think it's all kind of coming from your mouth to Salam and vice versa, but there's nothing that really lays out, here's our expectations, here's our recommendations.
I think it's important that it comes from the chair and board, not through Mark.
No.
Because Mark has a different,
That's my point, is that the
reality,
council
yes.
should draft a letter to the Department of Education, who's got the responsibility under this law, and we're going to express our.
the key piece from my experience down there is get a response.
Well, that's true.
And that's the hard part, is to get them to acknowledge.
Then we invite
the-
Salam to our meeting and then get a response. I don't know.
Yeah, you gotta get the letter back agreeing, because otherwise there's no agreement.
Right.
Thank you very much for your letter. We'll do whatever we want.
Well,
yeah, and I don't think, again, there is some relationship building and trust and communication that needs to happen here that's not filtered. And I really have a great deal of respect and acknowledgement of that fact. I do know that Salam has been, so there's another piece, is that relationship between the Chief Education Office and the agencies as well, that we're getting clarification on, and what is the role there in terms of overseeing results and guiding processes and criteria and other pieces of that. And we think that the law has a great deal of clarity on that too, but the devil's in the detail around implementation there as well. So I think that this is something that Salam and Lindsay would both welcome, that if it's a conversation about how do we establish a partnership and clarity around our roles and expectations of that, I believe that would be a welcome conversation to have. Salam had wanted to be at this council meeting, but he's hiring two very, very critical staff positions today. So he wasn't able to come today, but he has it on his calendar for the next STEM council meeting. So it'd be good for us to write that and put that forward before then. What specifically steps do you want to take in regard to such a letter, and when?
Well, I think it's important that we do something within before legislative days, which is mid-September, because ultimately we need to understand that there's two-way dialogue, everything's going the right direction before legislative days. Because it would set a different tone in the conversations we had.
And I would think the letter would address, you went through the recommendations we made before, that would address recommendations for the STEM hubs and to expand that, the recommendation on the grants, recommendation on post-secondary, as well as the recommendation around equity and how those dollars get spent, to say this is what we want to accomplish, and we want to partner with you to accomplish this goal, and we have to figure out what the rest of it goes like, how we want to be involved in the process. We want.
And I think we have to start defining what success looks like here. In a sense that it's not only the intention, but I think we have to say,
what are outcomes we're trying to achieve.
But in terms of our relationship, we are actually looking for an explicit understanding of a partnership, of that partnership, where we understand what we're both bringing to the table. I think we're desiring that explicit acknowledgement of the relationship of partnership, and how do we define that? As opposed to, we need to move from an advisory role to a partnership role.
You guys okay with that? You okay with that, Aubrey? Okay. I think you just need to get on record so it's
Okay.
so it's clear.
Who has the star and by when?
I will.
How do you want
This
that
is
to
why
go?
I love not being chair.
Yeah,
I think
I'll
this
take
is
care
a
of it.
responsibility.
Lisa Murray. I will
used
Or
to
take a
co-chair.
shot.
You're
I'm
vice
chair.
chair now, all right?
I
All
will
in
take
favor?
a shot. I'll work with Mark, and we will get you a draft to look at.
And I'd be more than happy to.
You guys can review it. I want you to get your review, but I will charge. I'll
Within
get
the next
first
2
draft
weeks?
Next week. We're gonna
Okay.
get going, 'cause I'll have to get a draft out within the next week, so I'll work on it this week.
Okay.
I'll get a big glass of wine and 2 beers, and we'll figure this out. All right.
It's always Lucky Lab.
So,
Okay.
do you want to move to the
Yeah.
more specific pieces of this?
Why don't we just quickly
Quickly?
get on it, see what it is, and maybe we'll ask for comments.
Yeah, so one quick thing is I would like to have you, not right now, but look at the overarching roles and work there, because what I've tried to do is capture the roles, and this could inform the letter
Yeah.
as well, the specific roles of this council. And I believe that when you look at those overarching roles and work, to me, the level of influence and ability to impact change is quite pronounced to me within the roles and both the implied legislation and these specific roles. The conversations with Nancy, and I need to verify this with Lindsay, were very clear that she wanted to see this council work alongside the Chief Education Office to monitor outcomes and results. What has been the impact to keep the focus on equity and our underserved populations, as well as our rural communities as well, and to make sure we're investing in places to actually get that change. There's challenges there that
How
we will
expensive
talk
are these
later.
responsibilities?
Well, yeah. Well, there's one that's very, very expensive, and that's the longitudinal data system that allows us to track the metrics. That to me is a huge barrier in our system right now, is that the metrics that we want to see to drive the analysis
And more
are very
importantly,
difficult to
I understand,
get.
but that's not our.
That's not your role,
That's not our
but-
budget dollars. But,
No, it's not your budget
But
dollars.
what responsibilities are we lining out here and signing up to be responsible for that we have no budget to execute on?
Well, I think that's what.
There's only one of you, right?
There's only one of me. One of the last acts of Nancy has been to find dollars to get support at the Chief Education Office, as well as working with Salam to ensure that these investment dollars are building capacity at ODE to strengthen the implementation and to ensure the impact. So those are
very
both.
similarly to how you have this gridded out in regards to full responsibility, whether or not you're a lead or you're a input support. I think that's great. As a lead, obviously that means financially. I would assume we have significant responsibilities on those items. And then obviously, if you did a similar graph here in regards to budgetary time commitments, budgetary commitments, and understand where we are between your FTE, your new person's FTE, and where the priorities are, and where the gaps are going to be in regards to dollars. Because one of the conversations I do think we need to have in the short session is an issue of
Staffing.
you got it.
Capacity.
We're moving.
Yeah.
We got things going, but now we're hitting a wall because we don't have the
That's huge.
resources to execute. And I think there'll be more than enough legislators to be able to understand that.
That would be tremendous.
So, that said, we have to know in our mission what we can accomplish with 1.5 FTE or 2 FTE and what we can't. And then we have to be able to make an argument of the importance of those things that we can. So, if you can break that down, I mean, that would be my request, break that down. Obviously, there's agencies that might be able to volunteer assistance and time on some of these things. But again, do you want the people that you're measuring and working with providing the work on the measure?
There's a role for that.
There's a role.
Yeah.
Okay.
That request may take some time as
I
things
understand. So
flesh
the-
out,
the
because it's a
issue
little
is
more
this.
complex with
So the
budget.
legislative cycle, as we discussed before, starts in September. There's 2 legislative days scheduled before the end of the year. We need to be teeing this up in the fall.
Mhm.
The session is short, it's packed, and it's violent in the sense of so many things asking for attention and so little attention to be had. If there's any chance of any changes to or new appropriations or new changes of how money moves, it's going to have to be teed up way prior to December, so that when it arrives in the session, it has a snowball's chance.
Okay.
So,
Can we put that on in October, so time frame to?
so first legislative
Okay.
days is mid-September,
Yeah, I know.
so you're going to miss one, but I think.
Well, I think the general framing can be done before that.
So one of the questions in that regard, I agree, we can at least broach the topic as we talk about our successes, is you need to reach out to a chair of either ed or higher ed or whoever we believe we need to speak to, and ask for your 10 minutes or 15 minutes during legislative days to even get scheduled, right? I think you'll probably find friends in higher ed that would do that very quickly. But obviously, a majority of our work is in K through 12, so it's probably
Well,
important
we
to
have-
find that committee.
Definitely have
So,
support there as
so
well.
we can at least tee this up in the second legislative session. You'd want to make very specific requests about any law that you would have in the session, which means you have only about 30 days after the first one to get it all done, fired through.
Chair, do you want to go through these at all, or do you want to deal with those separately? So one of the things that we tried to do were the specific roles around the investments themselves, and to discuss, and it may vary by investment. The STEM hubs look different substantially than the other 2 investment areas, the post-secondary as well as this. So your input and engagement around those you might have different desires in each of those, and I can understand why you would want to see, to have a different role in reviewing or approving or something to that effect. So here's a huge list of the various things, and there's talking with Laura and her team, and there's probably another 30 or 40 various grain sizes on here as well. They're working very, very hard to respond to the direction that I've provided on your behalf with regard to these investments and the criteria put forward. By the way, you had a great, saying, are our agency goals aligned to the goals of the council? And that, I think, is a really phenomenal question to engage with the agency heads. And I'll make sure that that's put forward to the P20 cabinet, which is the agency heads with the chief education officer, to say, how are you engaging in, and where do you see these fitting with the agency goals?
So I'll give you a little insight into how I see this, and I don't know how the other folks share this, but I look at this kind of as a portfolio manager.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have specific things that I'm looking for investments in and returns of those investments.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I would like to know, number one, do I have the dollars to invest? And if I do, are the dollars going into the things that I say are important? Okay, recognizing that those are my priorities. There's one list of things I think are important, but I'd also like to see the things that they say are important. Okay, so if whoever the people are that are making these investments, they're using some metric to decide where they're going to put those dollars. And if they can actually quantify what the buckets are, even if they don't line up with mine, I'd like to see those. Okay, and then at the other side of that, look at the outcomes. Okay, so did I get what I wanted out of my portfolio investments? Number 2, did they get what they wanted out of their portfolio investments? And number 3, where do those things line up? Okay, so in an ideal world, our requests may be a subset of all the investments that they end up making, but they're a very targeted subset, and we are moving towards our goal.
And I think that the fundamental issue in all of this is that there is a desire in the system to sustain. How is it that any time that you look for money, that money can be used to sustain an existing underinvested environment? So everybody's looking for a sustain. Our job, however, is to transform. Our job is to actually create a catalyst for transformation. This is a fundamental conflict which we need to just be honest about. We know that there's not enough money for sustaining existing programs, but that's not our, but we at the same time want to make sure that we have the potential to be this catalyst for transformation. So unless we can be honest about that, we're not going to, that's the underlying root cause of our discomfort here, I would argue.
Well, I'd say, I'd go a step beyond that, because going from my portfolio perspective, I don't care. Okay, I need the results. Exactly, I need the results. So there may be interventions that need to happen, okay, that may not be in alignment with the status quo. Okay, so there needs to be some mechanism for that transformation to happen. And if there isn't, then I'm wondering where the impetus for that transformation can come from. It's not from us and the investments that we're actually suggesting be made.
Yeah. And that goes back to the issue of we may need to be sustaining in order to replicate. So again, we're not just saying our job is merely to be disruptive for the sake of disrupting. Right? That's why I always like the metaphor that you brought in, Dwayne, which is of the investment portfolio. And that's all and this is the partnership that we're looking for and a conversation that we're looking for and this ecotone that we want to step into.
Well, and I would say also to go along with these investments, sometimes you have really long-term investments and sometimes your investment cycle is much tighter and your intervention cycle. So that piece also needs to play into this partnership. For some, we want to monitor the investment fairly closely and maybe make interventions every quarter or find out what are the results by quarter. We have an education system that has a time constant, if you will, to make the engineering term, that is very, very long. You don't see change rapidly on macro scales. You can see change happen rapidly on micro scales. And the education system is not set up to monitor at the micro system levels. You see it at the macro, and so therefore it's really hard to capture what's working well and what's not, and then to scale it. We're hoping to change that through some of the other pieces of the system that we have in play. So I think that is something, when are those interventions needed? Is biennium sufficient to get those results? Is annual sufficient to monitor that? Or do you want more frequently? And that should probably vary based on our investments.
Absolutely.
So I think that needs to be a piece of our expectation and how we clarify is how frequently do we want those updates?
Well, and I think that gets into the relationship we have between the agency and the folks doing the direct investments in us, right? So to be able to say that, let's look at the portfolio perspective. I've got a 10-year investment that I'm managing. Okay, great. If I'm getting 2% out of that, that may be enough for me. Okay, however, if I have a high rate of return I'm looking on for specific types of projects, then I can't wait 10 years for that. And to me, the STEM Hub is a great example of this. It's a pilot, okay, that can deliver, conceptually.
We're implementing. It's beyond a pilot at this point.
Well, but I'm looking at it as a pilot that is going to scale. Okay, so we have not scaled this across the state yet, and we haven't actually gotten all the input back on what's working, what's not.
Yeah.
But we know that we did something that's important, and we're going to actually bet heavily on the outcomes of this.
Yes, we are.
Right, so we may need to put dollars to change some certain things that we find out in our process that increases the outcomes of that portfolio piece. Can't wait 10 years for that.
Nope.
Okay, so different cadences, different returns on investment, and we support both of those.
Let me answer this question. As the council, we haven't really expressed our desire between kind of large cap blue chip things that are working and private equity that is really highly risky. We haven't said how we want to allocate those dollars, which I think is the question we're debating. We need to do
When we
things.
have dollars.
Yeah. First of all, we don't have enough.
Well, we've already invested,
Yeah,
and we've
right.
invested in the blue chips,
Right.
you know, or invested in a firm that will invest for us.
Yeah. So, but as we look at these innovation grants, do we want to give some guidance on how much we want to grow good programs that are having real results, that are measurable and producing great things, and scale those up, or do we want to spend on private equity kind of innovative transformational programs, and what's the right balance between that in our portfolio as we give the Department of Education some guidance on how we want to spend that
And
money?
there's this, OPAS did this, right? When it was working well. It took its $1 million and it made speculative bets that were 2-year funding cycles, and at the end, it reviewed things, and if there was something that was working, the next cycle, it got a lot more money, and when we tried to kill those things that did not, right? I mean, bad choice of words, but we would not fund those things that or we'd let them go find their funding elsewhere. But that cycle is so important, because there were programs already in the state that would come to us and say, well, we're great, just feed us your entire $1 million budget.
That's what DOME's whole platform was, the robotics, all the stuff. that's
Just keep
happening
pouring it into
right now.
robotics, keep pouring it into robotics, and there's something to be said.
Not
But
much wrong.
there,
How do you get change other
how do you
places?
get to change other places? Exactly. So that goes to this issue of my concern also in agencies, right? You pour money in, they're going to go to those things that already have pre-existing momentum and or champions and or employees that are
Or knowledge of. I mean, to be fair to the system,
But,
you know,
but that's where you talk about the risk, the appetite for risk. The system itself traditionally has a low appetite for risk.
no appetite.
I was being polite.
I,
But no, to be
Mark
honest,
will
I mean,
defend.
this is a tension point, and I think we just have to be honest.
Yeah.
That our desire is to have a mixed portfolio of which there is that appetite for higher risk.
So let's move on, but I will try to articulate that concept. You guys can think about what the number should be in terms of, but to clearly make it clear, we want to look at a little bit of both. We want to look at those programs that are proven and results-oriented, and we want to reward those people and scale those. We also want to do some transformational innovation, things that really challenge the system and understand the
This
risks
is
that
the
come with
first
that.
cycle, right?
Yeah.
A real cycle of
Yeah.
STEM grants.
for the
that
STEM,
we're-
for the STEM
Yeah.
council.
Yeah,
Yes.
council grants. So, a larger net to see what you're fishing for,
Right.
right? And then focusing in future sessions a little bit. I think.
So as Laura presents, I think it would be really good for us as a council to be considering all of these questions so that we can establish understanding again about where the council desires to be engaged, and then we negotiate that with Salam and the Chief Education Office. One thing that I've heard already from you all is to be more closely linked to the hubs themselves in this process, and so there will be certainly an invitation to engage in the review of those applications for the new hubs and to review the final reports and to assess where the current hubs are as well. So that invitation will be.
So you have review as desired. I just take review.
Well, I think that this is, yeah.
I would, look,
Well,
you're going to need to push this work out on us. No one's going to sit there and clamor for it, right?
Well, I think there's two pieces to this. One is there's an as desired, and two, this council will benefit by reviewing in the weeds to get a better understanding of, holy cow, that's phenomenal. Why don't we have more of those? Or wow, this is the kind of level
is
that we're
horribly
seeing.
written.
This is how we're seeing it.
Yes, exactly.
Or wow, this has a great grant writer, but it's clear that there's no substance there or limited substance.
I think
Et cetera.
early on, I think it's important that we
It's
all
important for to roll up our
And-
get what
sleeves.
we're doing.
With the understanding of partnership here.
Well,
That again, we believe we're completely committed to the STEM hubs. We want them to be successful. So how can we help make that happen?
Well, and unless we're reviewing at the begining,
5
we'll be
minutes, yeah.
surprised when the results come in at the end.
and then Cheryl's not
Yeah.
here, so I will give a very quick overview of Cheryl, and then we'll jump to Laura.
Okay.
So-
So let's take that was great discussion. I really appreciate
you.
the council engaging in this. It's very helpful. I will take the pen on the letter. I'll get it out to you hopefully by middle of next week for your comments and thoughts. And I think it's a good place. I think the words of wisdom here are great. I think we have a chance to kind of take what we've got here and make it successful, and so I think that's our job. So let's take a 5-minute break, and we'll get back and cover some of the other items that we want to cover. Thank you. All right,
Great.
here we go.
So in regard to the post-secondary equity and STEM dollars, those dollars flowed. I just want to give you an update. Cheryl Myers, the Chief of Staff for the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, is out ill this morning, so she's unable to be here. But I'll fill you in briefly on some of the conversations that have happened. One, this is a $2 million investment that also in 3072 went to the Department of Education, mostly because of the timing of agency budgets and the House Bill 3072 implementation. The HEC and ODE have been working to figure out how to transfer those monies effectively to the HEC so that they are then managing those. And it'll be through an interagency agreement, we believe, at this point, and they're resolving then deliverables. And then ultimately these dollars would be going into the HEC's budget, not ODE's budget. So there's some administrative processes that are going there. The HEC is very thankful for the STEM Council's investment in this regard. It complements some of the changes that we heard from Brian a couple of councils ago, or maybe that was the STEM outcomes and metrics, I can't recall, but who briefed us on the changes in the HEC's funding formula, where there's incentives for graduating students with degrees in high-wage, high-demand fields. The vast majority are STEM fields. Also to graduate students of color. This came out of the, again, the Lewis Stokes Alliance for Minority Participation in STEM that is active at OSU and PSU. And so using the best attributes of those and the national research that is shaping this, investment. When talking with Cheryl Myers, she indicated that there is already a group talking about equity that is represented. It's a subcommittee of the HEC that consists of several people from community colleges as well as universities, as well as others representing communities of color, and they're having conversations, so this fits very well with their ongoing work. We've talked about phasing this, about having them answer several questions around, well, should this be, what are the criteria for disbursements of these funds? How are we going to manage these funds? How do we make sure that they are achieving the results that are intended, etc. They will be embarking on a design phase and coming back to, the proposal is to embark on a design phase and come back to this council in December with their proposal, so that this council can weigh in on making sure that institutions are accountable to those dollars. How do we monitor this investment? Yes.
I have a question and a comment.
Yes.
As usual. Did pretty extensive work on this at ETIC, because this was one of the charges at ETIC within the engineering and science programs to greatly increase the number of underrepresented graduates. That's four-year institutions only, not community colleges. Best practices on how to do this are pretty much known. They're implemented at OSU, as you mentioned, and very successful. They have been implemented to a degree at PSU as well. I don't know what the level of success they're having there, but a well-funded and well-implemented program has dramatic results. Dramatic in both minorities, women, rural students. And it's a pretty simple formula that costs money. Do not study this one to death. Heck, get the money allocated to those positions and you will have results within honestly, you could save sophomores right now from failing, right? And get them into the professional programs. It is not rocket science. This is just about pairing students with peers and mentors and giving them study tables and all those things that lead to higher level of success. The numbers at OSU are staggering between a minority or underrepresented group going into OSU's engineering program and a white male. The white males are still getting culled out of those programs at a normal historic rate, and the minorities and the underrepresented groups that have the special attention. And you're just talking about someone answering questions and being there and helping them through time.
Great community.
The graduation rates go through the roof. Do not overstay this. Do not spend millions of dollars thinking about this. Get the money to the schools. And if it doesn't, this is exactly where we should be jumping up and down, screaming. Because there's a playbook.
Yeah.
Xerox it.
Yeah.
Because I don't think anybody in the legislature wants this thing studied.
Do
They want
you
more
have a
graduates.
sense, Mark, that Cheryl kind of
Yes.
has a vision? She kind of
No. Yeah, absolutely. I've talked with both
Good,
Cheryl and,
good.
and Ben,
Good.
and put forward, I believe I forwarded to this council some of the summary that I had shared with Cheryl and Ben of our conversations and what this council saw from OSU, including creating community, including peer mentoring groups, and including bridging programs. Those elements that were very successful, engaging industry, making sure they create networks so that when they graduate, they have opportunities to actually get jobs. So all of those are there. I think that
My problem with that, Mark, is that will be used as justification to create FTEs within the HEC to coordinate that. And
That's
that is
not the way they're
okay,
talking about
good,
it.
Because that's
Okay.
not what's needed. FTEs are needed
Yeah.
in the institutions to do this work, not at the HEC, not
Yeah.
at any level.
And that's
of
why,
management.
and that's why we proposed this to engage with communities of color, students, and this equity group to weigh in on that and to not circumvent, to honor the fact that there are institutional politics in this mix as well, and we want to make sure that this money gets to the field without being peanut buttered across the system, so that it goes
Yes.
and sets some criteria through there. So there will, the idea is that there needs to be a public process of incorporating that and getting it then out to the institution. So I think that we can do that in a pretty expeditious fashion.
So what is our relationship with the HEC? What the heck's our relationship with the HEC?
Similar to other agencies, there has been a proposal by this council for this investment. The HEC has been honoring that and said we will come back with this proposal and ensure that this is in alignment with the council's recommendations and to allow
But we've
that
made no
process to go through.
recommendations in regards to what we deem acceptable percentages of overhead, taxation, everything else by director. I mean, so again, it's $2 million, right? You're talking about, if all $2 million hit the streets, you could talk about maybe hiring 15 people that are actually out there doing work for the next biennium and actually making a difference. Or somebody's going to say, well,
Yeah.
if I got to reach out to all these community groups and everything else, well, I've got to buy off that FTE as opposed to the FTE for the kid
So-
that's sitting in their school right now not getting any attention.
So as an action item,
Yeah.
I believe that the HEC is aware of those concerns and shares those. And I would suggest as an action item that Cheryl comes directly
That's
to
right.
the next council meeting.
Right.
So that
I
those
just-
can be.
Good timing.
Okay?
Good.
That $2 million could really pump up existing
Yeah.
programs and make a major difference.
Yes.
In
Or it
kids'
could
lives.
disappear into the.
Kids' life.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to get straight in
Administrative
my
overhead.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get straight in my head what the relationships look like. In other words, we just finished talking about our relationship with the chief education, what used to be the chief education officer, and it providing advice on where their investments were going to go.
Yeah.
Do we have a similar relationship with HEC, or do we have a different relationship with HEC and their investments?
Should be the same, but I will encourage you even stronger terms to get memos of understanding.
That's kind of where I was going with that.
Yeah.
So I think yes.
So going back to our
It
portfolio.
caused me to write another letter.
Just looking for you to do work here, Jim.
God, I'm getting more assignments here.
I'll be happy
The way
to
it
help
works
you
here,
with
guys. Okay, all right. Good advice. I think points well taken, and I think we all agree that.
Yeah, I would
Any
propose that we do the letter after meeting with Cheryl
Cheryl,
directly.
yeah.
Yes.
So that we can establish a personal relationship there before a more official one in that regard.
I was going to send a friendly letter. Come on now.
Well,
just a friendly letter that we were looking forward to partnering with them and
whenever
working together.
people get those letters, they of course look for the legal aspects to it. They look for what's underpinning this. Is there another game being played? And the opportunity for confusion and misrepresentation is enormous.
All right.
How's that?
In other words, it creates more work for Mark, is what it creates.
It does. But, yeah. So
He's
let's
got
have
smooth all
Cheryl
the
come to the
feathers.
council or Ben.
Okay, all righty. Good update, good counsel. I think the council would agree with the words of Eric that this is one that I think has been studied well. So, all right, let's move on to the next item, which is ODE STEM investment timeline. Kind of what you're thinking here.
Okay.
So, Laura, you want to join us? I'm sure she's been having an earful as she's listened to us talk.
You ready?
Joy to be here.
That's a joy to be here.
Are you
Thank
sure
you for
about that?
No. Thank you, Mark, for the opportunity.
Couldn't have come at a better time, Laura.
I know.
We
So-
appreciate the work you do. And
Really?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
So I'm Laura Roach. I'm at the Department of Education, and I have been the state director for career and technical education for the last few years, and actually I've spent most of the last few years just focusing on CTE. And apparently now I have an opportunity to help focus on STEM. So the staff that is working for me right now will be working on your grants, and we're in the process of trying to hire some new staff. We've had quite a bit of transition in the department in the last 3 months. So we're bringing in a group of new people who will start fresh with some of this work as well. So first of all, I wanted to say on behalf of Salam, thank you. I know how important this work really is to him. He has personally expressed to me, and I know to Mark, that he would like to be involved and that he wants to be involved. And I don't know if you know or not, but Salam has a CTE background. And he came from the team that I'm director of right now, which was career and technical education, and became the assistant superintendent before leaving and going to Salem Kaiser, where he's just built the CTE Center. So he has a strong commitment to CTE and STEM and science, and his son is in OSU and graduated and was actually in agriculture and business. And so there's a lot of connections for him. This isn't a distant topic for him. He's very interested, and he's very interested in seeing it integrated across the system and across the various academic areas as well. So I think he will be here when he has an opportunity, but I would not take his absence as an indication of a lack of interest. That is simply not the case. He was also co-chair of our CTE Advisory Committee. And I have to say, listening to you and your concerns, I would have to say that our CTE Advisory Committee was amazing and continues to be amazing. And the kinds of concerns that you're expressing have not been my experience in the last couple of years in working with that group. So I think that we do have good processes that we can emulate and give you the kind of engagement that you would like to have without slowing down the process too much, because the biennium goes by fast. It really does. So that's part of what I would share with you from his point of view and the experience that I've had so far. I agree that the end of the session was very challenging. It was rather frenetic, and some decisions had to be made right on a dime, and Eric was there with us, as was Mark, when decisions had to be made very quickly in order to keep House Bill 3072 from imploding. That's correct terminology. There's also something that I have learned in working with Mark on this, is that Senate Bill 215 is still a part of the STEM strategic and OARs. And therefore, we have to go back to Senate Bill 215 as well as HB 3072. So that's been a little bit more complex for us in trying to implement some of the things we thought you wanted to have, because those rules were in place and still guide our work. and then we have to create new rules to guide the future work. And so it's been a little tricky, to be honest. But the two attorneys in the department, Emily is new. She's been more than gracious. She's been to several meetings with the CTE revitalization group trying to understand, and would be interested in participating with you guys as well. Because the more understanding they have, the better they're able to help us in the process. So that's part I would share with you as well. Out of the HB 3072 and the monies that we're given, we are trying to build capacity internally to support this work, as well as externally out in the field. And I wanted to share two things with you because there are a couple things that you brought up. One is, to what degree, do you mind if you pass that around? To what degree is the department looking at strategic investments across the board and trying to integrate them? And I think that was a concern that we had last year. That the strategic investments came in very quickly, had a lot of new staff engaged in that process, and they were just trying to build a strategic plan right away. And all of the staff were new, and there were new directions. The Oregon Education Investment Board was new. And so this particular one says Legislative Education Investments Timeline. This is the one that includes almost all the investments from the legislature to our Office of Learning. And if you look down there, you can see that there are investments in equity and things to support students who are underserved. There are the investments for STEM and CTE listed there. And then you can see accelerated college credit, post-secondary. So you can begin to see the scope of the investments that came into the Office of Learning. And this was a first attempt to organize those, and it may change over time a little bit, to organize them, to figure out when could we get those investments out the door, and how could we then look at them across all the different investments to have some shared outcomes. So it gives you kind of the scope of the Office of Learning right now and trying to organize this and make sure that things happen. What we also did is try to lay out incremental rollouts, because the schools cannot handle all the grants at one time. You know, if we roll them all, and we can't produce them all at one time either, but if you can roll them out over through the course of up through January and March, then they can handle the grant writing and the processing. Most all of the STEM and CTE grants are in the early cycle, so we're right now trying very hard to get those together right now. Not only one of the RFPs has been fully drafted at this point. So I just wanted to share that with you. I think it's an important piece of information when you look at the overall work.
Can I ask you a question? Mm-hmm. How do you think of the interconnection of some of these things? Because you can do one thing one place, one thing someplace else. There's no necessary alignment or connection within the school system or continuity of programs that tie things together. Do you guys think about that from a system basis?
Yes, and I do.
Oh, okay.
One of the things, for example, that I wanted to look at is if STEM had summer programs and CTE had summer programs and we already have a summer program, how do you collectively look at that to see if the outcomes are similar, and should they be better aligned, or are they really that different and should go different directions? The other thing is, this is where I think you'll find Salam's strength, in that he is very interested in cross pollination, for lack of a better word, and cross implementation. I think this will be our first real effort to do it well. And again, it has to do with timing, finding out you get the money at the end of June. The governor may not sign the bill until August, and you really can't do anything until that happens. Then suddenly everybody's waiting for the money. So it really takes a lot of planning time, and I think that will happen over the course of the year under his leadership. So I think it's more of a future thing, but it's certainly on our minds.
Okay.
The other thing that is coming up, all of the RFPs that we develop will be reviewed with an equity lens, and that's mandatory in the department. So we'll have a fiscal review, we'll have a legal review, and we'll have an equity lens review. So all of the grants
have to go through that review process before they get out the door.
And does your equity lens include low income too, not just children of color and things like that?
Well, it's certainly in the grants that we're doing that will include low income. So that's a little bit of that piece, and I don't know if I handed you, I got up a little early this morning.
we
My
got
grandson was, had me up leaving at 4 this morning, so I put these together. Did all of you get these?
Yeah, we got that too.
Okay, so this is the list of investments that were given to me to make sure that they were developed in RFP processes or contracts. And I believe that these directly align to the decisions that were made during the legislative session around the STEM hubs and the innovation grants and first robotics and post-secondary education. So what happens for me is when I get a document like this, you know, the specialists that are involved in the process will attempt to take this document and develop an RFP that meets the criteria that have been set forth. In that process, then they all work with me and with Mark and all the different people in ODE to try to create something that is that leads a school or a district in the direction that we believe is your intent. In terms of the outcomes and deliverables, I wanted to just share something with you because I think this might be something to ponder over the long term. We operate under Department of Administrative Services rules, and we have no choices in that. And anybody who handles state money has no choice. In a grant, you cannot declare the deliverables that a grantee receives. You can target outcomes and those kinds of things. But if you go to declaring what deliverable has to happen, then it becomes a contract. If it's a contract of over $30,000, then it has to have a feasibility study. And if it gets over $250,000, it's got to go to the Attorney General's office. It's state law. I don't care who handles the money. So these are the processes that we work with in order to have a fair and equitable RFP process so that anyone can apply. And so in sharing this with you, you'll also see that some places we suggested a direct grant, and it may turn out that we won't be able to do that because of the contract or the RFP process. So we don't have, we have to use our best judgment, and we have to work with our internal leaders to make sure that we honor the law and that it is fair and equitable for all the programs. So
You're saying direct grant, what is that?
Direct grant would mean I chose you to take care of this money for me and deliver the program, and I just transfer the money to you. You didn't apply for it or write an RFP or whatever, but I just transfer the money to you. Like To the HEC will be a direct grant from us to the HEC.
Okay, as opposed to going through an RFP process, which goes through the whole evaluation.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
So there are processes too where there can be a request for an application or those kinds of things, but it gets fairly complicated. And all I'm saying to you is not all the decisions that we would like to make, we get to make the way we would like to. We do have to follow state law. And oh yeah, anybody else has to follow the same state law processes. So there may be changes in this. This was an early draft right here. And this one is one that's been shared with schools, and there may have to be changes with this as well over time. But we felt that this honored the work that you had requested. And so if that's not the case, I would certainly like to know that before we start the RFP process.
Yeah, and just in terms of full disclosure, I developed that document based on the council's, will there, and you'll notice at the top of that are the underlying principles that we have discussed, and everything in this document we talked about at the June council meeting. So if it's something different than what you were expecting, please,
Just out of
let's talk.
curiosity, how did the 4.7, how did you decide on the split of the 4.75?
Yeah.
I don't think we saw that.
We did not.
Okay, I just want to be clear on that.
Yes, we did not look at the specific allocations of the innovation grants. Those were estimates that I had done based on, capacity in the system and the difference between a pilot and need to buy equipment and the cost of professional development and other things. So, yes.
Yes,
That
smile at me and
allocation
be
that
nice.
So I would say only on
That's
that
my
area. I think
fault.
everything else is pretty well defined, but the 4.75, I think that's.
We can we should talk.
I mean, if the council is comfortable with that, that's great. That's something that, it's the first time I've seen it, but it doesn't seem out of line, but I have no sense of whether that creates the greatest value.
Oh, the
Second
Page
page,
two.
second page, the
Yeah.
4.75, which is innovation grants, it's divided into 4 column or rows there, and it's dollars for each of those areas. And I'm not the expert in this clearly, and I don't know where the leverage point is, and they're all related to this idea of math in real life and, you know, adaptive learning and things like that around mathematics. And there was some digital and there was some out-of-school programs. The allocation there, I don't have no sense of whether that's the right allocation or not.
And so Monica, this is it seems to me from our perspective, this is a very critical piece to focus on. And because this is where we're going to really be helping to guide the granting process to make sure that we get the outcomes that we're looking for, which is obviously where you started from.
Yeah.
How could we, given the timing of this,
Yeah.
given the process, we obviously don't want to slow things down, but at the same time, this is very important for us because this is really where we're looking to guide the outcomes that we see. How might we, do we have an opportunity to?
We do. So all
discuss
of
this?
these are really later in the game. This actually, you know, came about because we had 3 days to get a response
Right.
to the Department of Education about how to allocate this. So this was my best estimate of the council's will at that time, but I really should have come back to the council to have a deeper conversation about that allocation. And maybe what we need to do is at the next council meeting, dive into each of these more deeply.
Yeah, and I would like to kind of have a vision of what the success looks like in each of these areas, so that we understand, because again, we want to avoid a situation where it merely fits the criteria, therefore we do it, but that may not, but we may not have a clear vision of success. And I think that we want this money to have the most powerful impact it can, therefore we must guide as much as we can this process to what success looks like for us, and that helps us.
Well, and I also think about programs that could have multiple outcomes in these various categories. You know, you may say one produces math adaptive learning, but it could also have other, you could do that through coding. You know, I don't know if there's twofers here, so you kind of do these in silos as opposed to how do you integrate them to get the greatest outcome in a combined setting. I'm not the educator here, but I just think that this is maybe a good starting point, but I still worry about the intersection and the value created and whether the outcomes are the ones we're looking for. So
I think we have time on these two. So
maybe
let's on the next council agenda to, and I know that Mark Freed has been looking more deeply about the math and how that, you know, that desire on the council fits with Common Core implementation and the establishment of the Oregon Math Project. So there's other pieces of the ecosystem that are also underway that these need to merge in with.
So the process that we've used with CTE revitalization is that when we develop an RFP, we've shared it. You have to be really careful though, because if that RFP gets shared with other folks, then you lose the credibility. In other words, people who are applying for it have access to something that everybody else doesn't have access to. So it has to be protected within the group that does the review of the RFP. Does that make sense? So that it's fair and equitable for everybody to apply for it. So, I mean, we have done that with the CTE Revitalization Council, and but they also turn it around pretty quickly, and they also have some preliminary discussions with us. For example, high wage, high demand, it is a tricky thing, I'm just saying. And so we've gotten some feedback from them. We're trying to draft some policy to go with their CTE revitalization grants, and at some point we'll have to roll with it, or else the grants are not. We have a commitment to get them out the door August 31, and they're going. So if you have concerns, we'd like to know as soon as possible. You can share that with Mark, and he can share it with me, because we did have to send this out to the school districts, and so they're going to be looking for some, along this line about when those grants will come out. Having said that, I know we're already behind because we're still hiring people.
So related to the 4.75, let me just throw this out as an idea, and I'm not trying to change the way you're doing things, but just a thought. You're looking for innovative programs, successful programs in any of these areas, and those who can check the box for 2 or 3 of these might be of greater value to us than one that just checks one of the boxes. And because it's the first time you've done in these areas, are you trying to create a greater pool of ideas and thoughts and not so make it so linear as opposed to, come on, come all, this is what we're looking for in a broad category. Once we look at these things, we may decide we want to, making this up, we might want to spend everything in out-of-school programs potentially because they're so successful and they're so great. But we don't know that because we've kind of limited the scope of this. And in this first phase, we're trying to get really cool ideas and innovative and not limit ourselves to these individual buckets. And we only have $4.75 million. It's not a lot of money. And we want the best leverage and outcome for the dollars we're spending. And I worry that we check the box, we put them in there, and we just do things in each of these boxes because it meets our criteria as opposed to the systemic results we're looking for. I'm maybe speaking out of school here.
No, I mean, if you look at the digital literacy, computer science portion of it, then you're talking about curriculum development here, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you tie everything, you tie multiple of these together in that phase. On curriculum development, from your experience, when the state does curriculum development and tries to push it out to schools, what does success look like in the number of schools that actually implement the curriculum that you've developed? Because I was a teacher once, and I can generally tell you what we did with the state's curriculum.
The state pushed.
We don't develop curriculum, and that's why.
Yeah.
We work with standards, and that's where the
Yeah.
state has focused on standards, because then the schools respond to it. I'm sure there has been curriculum development done, and I think there's a couple in this package here, but generally we have focused on standards. But you know, I can tell you that Mark, in talking with him, you know, he knows in the math arena, for example, that people really are looking for sample lesson plans and those kinds of things for applied learning because they don't have access to them. So there are pieces and times that it's appropriate, but in general, the state is focused on standards.
Okay.
You say Mark, this
No,
Mark
it's
or Mark?
Mark
Okay.
Freed.
Again, on
the other Mark.
I'm dealing with a couple Marks too. Mark
So are
Freed
we
is your partner.
leaning harder on professional development as opposed to curriculum development on that portion?
I would imagine.
In the math.
No, in the digital literacy, computer science side
Yes.
of things, because I think the curriculum development is.
Well, I think that some of the ETIC investments around SuperQuest and other things have developed a lot of curriculum already.
That's
and
my point.
That's all.
I
Right.
watched $400,000 get spent by an individual school creating curriculum for that school that they will not share with anybody using state dollars. I do not want that repeated here with this $750,000.
That's not me. That's certainly not
We
the
had a
intent.
wonderful conversation during our meeting
And let's
last
talk
week.
about who that
with
is.
How do we leverage our professional associations in this area? Where, you know, how do we leverage OCS stuff? Because they've done a lot of work on curriculum development. We want to leverage that network,
Yes.
leverage that expertise to the maximum, as opposed to Eric's point, creating something new. But I really love where Jim was going on this thing, and I think we really was to say we're looking for solutions that will actually move a needle that has an impact in multiple levels. And so I would challenge us not to also go into a box, but to look at how do integrated solutions be able to address multiple objectives that we've got defined.
I think that having been in an organization where we were taking that approach to a broader portfolio and looking for innovations at Washington STEM, I think it's a very valuable one, particularly early on in an organization's granting process. What does that innovation space look like? We are bound also by the legislation of 3072 and some budgetary notes that were involved in the conversations leading up to 3072 that specifically took these ideas and put them into law. So that is one of our constraints in this. It doesn't necessarily mean that we couldn't have sort of cast a broader net and to see along those lines, but that was the intent. There was not the specific budget allocations into these line items, but the dollars were for this intent. So defining, bringing greater definition to the outcome and what success looks like, I think is a really perfect thing for us to be doing.
The folks reviewing the grants will be cross-pollinating here enough where they could
That is the
reward the good work and the poor grants. I mean, if you get a whole bunch of money requests that are terrible in a particular area, can we move that money to someplace else?
We cannot move it from those to the STEM hubs,
No,
but we
no,
can,
no.
these line items are not
What
defined.
you're talking about is the hubs we have a certain amount of dollars, $5 million.
Yes.
We agree that that's the right place, and how
Right.
we do that is
Yes.
basically, at the 4.75, there were no earmarks on the 475 by specific category, were there?
These were the 4 categories that
But there
are
was-
in the law,
but
but
there
there
were no
wasn't an allocation
And
associated
it
with
didn't
each
say
of
we
those.
couldn't integrate, we couldn't.
Right, but
Yeah.
so my point is not to move to a different intention.
Yeah.
Maintain that intention.
Yeah, yeah.
But to
That's what I'm
recognize that we're looking and we'll judge the scoring based on the ability to address multiple areas. So we're looking for solutions that are actually cross
That would be,
functional, and that
Yeah.
and that would directly relate back to our scoring. That would be done. So that would be, I would think, a very much more powerful intention here.
So clearly, an out-of-school program that uses math and computer science,
Bingo.
bingo.
And has the
And equity.
And equity.
And equity.
and equity, and understand that directly relies that to adaptive learning pilots.
There you go.
Then-
That's what
then-
I'm trying to get to, and I worry that they're individuals
Right.
as
The-
opposed to.
Because the problem is we have to look at it, how is it going to be perceived by the people receiving the RFPs?
Yeah.
And if we are prescriptive in a solution, they will say, oh, this is what they're looking for, we'll just design a solution for that. And we're looking for them to instead say, no, we're looking at you to think about in an innovative solution to address all of these areas.
So if you looked at the CTE revitalization grant, for example, we are saying we're looking for innovation, you know, it's called an innovation grant, and we're looking for partnerships, and we're looking for, you know, A, B, C, and D. And the applicants respond to that. And so we then know if how they're going to address those. So you could do that in a summer program. I have one caution, and that is sometimes you have, we got school people in here too, you have so many things in an RFP that people just can't do the lift. They can't do it, they can't turn it around on a dime and say, I can promise you I can do A, B, C, D, and E by this summer or next summer, because it takes more than what they can do right away. But there are ways to address multiple intents and multiple outcomes in an RFP, but that's just a caution. You know, and my staff has gotten now, like I brought it with me, I think the CTE revitalization grant, it may have 6 or 8 components. That's a pretty hefty lift by the time you get partners together and coordinate all that, and the assessments and the reporting back, it can become so onerous that the schools can't do it.
Well,
So I just give you that caution.
Well, I think this is where it gets into strategy and application, okay? Because, you know, expecting someone to turn around something like this in a couple of weeks, recognizing we're looking for a different way to address these RFPs is unfair. Yet, we actually know we're going to be doing this again next year. So to the point, it's like, okay, great. You may be... Exactly. It's like, start the thinking about what this is early. Okay, so we can actually get some really innovative responses to this. So, you know, maybe we go through this process this year with something that looks like what we're looking at now. But the intention is, you know, to tell them, okay, next year it's not going to be like this. Okay, we are looking for multiple impact areas. Okay.
we can tell them that now.
And I'd also suggest there might be a different model, which is only spend $1 million this year to get some programs up, with the idea you build a more robust program and spend and now you got to worry about sustainable funds, but if this is a pathway and an investment, we're trying to get outcomes, you don't have to spend equal amounts in equal years. You can think about, let's do a little bit this year with the idea of creating more robust, so we get those innovative programs and allow the time for the schools to be ready to go, rather than doing this on we're way behind the calendar in terms of this calendar year, school year. It's gone.
So could I have
Yeah.
a clarification? I thought, do we actually go through this on an annual basis, even though it's a biennial
2 years.
granting? So when we do this, this is going to be a single granting process that will extend.
There can be multiple phases to a granting process.
But you can have
multiple rollouts,
You
yes.
can have multiple rollouts. So could we do what Jim was recommending?
That is
as-
feasible, yes.
For us to say, in this rollout, we're going to allocate this much money, with an understanding we'll go through a second rollout.
Possibly.
Without
Earlier,
driving
so that
yourself
people
crazy.
can be ready. I mean, this whole school year.
Possibly, I think there's no...
That's how you
well,
do it.
there's-
But what we're looking for success here, and we recognize, I think to Jim's point, we need to move fast, but we also need to be reasonable about what we can expect, because we want success. And so could we kind of get some pilots going, get some proof of concepts going in this first round, and then build on those in the second round? From a business perspective, that's a much more, that's how we would approach it from an investment standpoint.
Well, I also worry about the time schedule. Right now, we are so far behind this. I mean, this school year is almost gone. I mean, in terms of people.
Well, I
preparing
think
for
if
this.
you're thinking about the school year,
Yeah.
yes. If we're
Out of
thinking
school?
about breaks and out of school and summertime, where a lot of this gets implemented, this was intentionally also, if you look at some of the underlying principles, links to other investments and finding synergies across these. This also should integrate with the work of the STEM hubs and those associated with the STEM hubs, and so that could be another priority for this investment piece.
Okay, so let's assume that we could go and look at the time frame of the calendar. Okay, so we've got one period of time which is, because January 1st, I assume, would be some of the earliest that you could allocate any money at all. So the question is, we've got the latter half, last half of the school year as one period of opportunity.
Right.
We also have then the summer as the next period of opportunity, and then we have a full school year and the summer. So we basically have these 3 periods of which we can go and think about what programs could we spin up and allocate for money for investments that we spin up for the spring 2016. How much money do we allocate? I don't know if this is an appropriate way to think about it, but we kind of to tie the timing back to when the programs would launch, to enable them to launch, so that we could then say, what worked in this time, what worked in this time, and we begin to learn about that. Is that
For the interest of time, I think that what I want to say is this is exactly the kind of thinking, and challenging assumptions that are positive and are needed in the system. Okay, there are some responses that we could make around some of them, going, well, maybe. There's others that go, wow, that's cool. How could we do that? And there's others that went,
you can't.
I'm sorry, your sense of reality is very different from what's there. So I think that, balancing all of that, let's think about having a deeper dive around these. Let's establish this relationship and partnership with the Department of Education and clarify that. Let's see if there's a willingness to engage with this council at the next meeting more deeply with the education specialists who would be identified to be a part of this, and bring in other pieces, such as if we are to do some of this stuff, we have to recognize that the administrative rules surrounding these need to be modified, and that affects timelines and then I love the fact that you're thinking of the field, because that is perhaps the biggest issue that we need to be accounting for, is when does this roll out, when is it going to have impact, and what sort of lift and capacity is required from the field to make these sorts of things happen.
So, using that thought process, it would appear, though, knowing our timeline to meet again, that all the digital literacy, computer science grants, out-of-school program grants would be granted in full.
No, this
before we meet
so
again.
These two are actually, again, as Laura said, this was an initial document. Those two are right on hold. There was an intent to make some direct grants to organizations who have this capacity already in the system, and we're trying to better understand whether or not that is doable within the structures of the Department of Education and the requirements under the Department of Administrative
If we released
Services.
a third of the money, quote unquote, to the grant process to deal with the period that you just mentioned, and then made a point to have the grant process start in January to release the remaining 2/3 of the money for the rest of the biennium, is that unreasonable?
One thing that, in the grant process, to answer your question, I don't think it's unreasonable. What you would probably want to do is say, here is my proposal, and in phase 1, I'm going to complete this. The department can release that much money then, when they show they've completed that part. Then on phase 2, you can release the second part. So we have control over how much money goes out the door. If somebody doesn't give us the reports, we can close it, put it on hold, call them and say, until we get your reports.
But that's assuming all the money's going to go to those individuals, as opposed to I'm talking about
redirecting
opening new
You're talking
grants.
about, you're talking about allocating the investments into these grants, allocating those as opposed to
I see
individual
what you're
programs.
saying.
Yeah.
Because I am all about some airlocks in grants that you just mentioned, right? You
Yeah.
show me this outcome,
Yeah.
midpoint, and if you've succeeded with this outcome, yes, then the rest of the grant is available. I'm a big proponent of that when you get into the bigger programs and longer term programs. But I'm talking about, do we just release a third of the money available for granting now? And then as we figure out a better
There's-
process and a longer timeline for folks to release the other 2/3 into the system.
The only thing I will say to you is schools do their budgeting in February, and what they haven't budgeted for in February is if you
So
have
you
that.
would lose that full period of the summer and
Maybe, you know, I
think
don't know.
The other
They do their
consideration
budget.
is the administrative burden that then is put on the Department of Education to run multi-phase, multi-review processes,
Understand.
which is a capacity issue.
Okay, so I guess we're getting to a point of, we need, obviously you're trying to understand the reality that you're working in. You're trying to understand the desire that we're working
Right.
in, and recognizing
We're starting.
that what we're
Yep.
trying to do is to be creative
Right.
in a solution that has the greatest impact on the system, because we all desire that to come. So what needs is, you know, the question is, because what we don't want to have happen is where we just kind of close our eyes and just hope that it's all going to work.
Right.
Because we know that that's probably not going to be successful, right?
Right.
So what we'd love to do is to understand how we can be strategic in the phasing of this to allow us to do some proof of concepts or some initial phases, but understand how we manage the administrative cost,
Right.
your reality. Which is
Right.
you've got to actually have it, you've got to manage this stuff.
I'm pretty sure.
Exactly. So we want to find a place that, so we're going to need to have a deeper dive on this one,
Yeah.
but it seems to me that this is a core, because I think
This is a
that,
great starting.
yeah, if
for
we
the-
could do
for the
that.
partnership.
And I think, yeah, and I
And are
think-
you open to
Oh,
us
sure,
working together that way?
absolutely. I just, I have some obligations internally and what we have shared with the schools so far. But I also, I would look at it two ways, as you suggested. What can we do now that's reasonable, that honors what we put forth and schools are kind of gearing up for? And then secondly, what can we put in place for the next biennium that also is supportive of what your goals are? I think some of it we can manage really well, some of it might be a little bit of a challenge, and I just share that with you because we have to honor some of the things that are living law. And Mark's right, some of this was passed on to us in law, and we don't have a lot of choices. But in the
that's
next
like the
iteration of
virtual
life,
Yeah,
it
but
can
that's
be
fine, but
different.
that's fine.
Right.
We get that.
That's
We're not
reality.
fine. We're okay with that. I mean, we understand the legislature spoke and we have to honor that. That's fine.
But
So
we,
it is a political process.
but we again, but we're also trying to fulfill the intention, because at the end of the day, we need to be able to deliver. But so in you know, that if we could have understanding of how we're moving forward, because we need to be educated. We don't know what the system requires in order for you to spin up a program. When do they need to have, you know, what's that process?
So the big one would be understanding that budgets in schools are made in February.
For
That's
the following year.
for the following year.
Wow.
And so that's just a really important piece of information as they are hearing.
So that means that they would have to have grant notification before that.
And we will, and we would. You
And
know,
so
that's
that-
our goal in this.
And that means so that any grants now wouldn't actually get implemented to the next biennium, or next school year?
No, some of them will be ready to go.
Oh, yeah.
But
So-
it
You said-
hasn't been budgeted though.
You said it hasn't been budgeted, so how they, so
For the
budgets don't
for the
matter?
rest of the year, for the coming year.
But it's not just schools we're talking about, we're also talking about hub
No, okay,
implementation, we're
okay.
talking about out-of-school programs, we're talking about other nonprofits, other professional organizations that can work up, that also work alongside
Right.
in support of the formal education system and district. So it's not necessarily flowing directly to the district, it is utilizing their connections to
We were just
So I
trying to
could
understand the
have-
connection to the budget,
Yeah,
though.
yeah, yeah.
She
I
was
could
making
have
a
a
point that the
CTE
budget
permanent
controls everything. I
place.
don't think the budget controls
And I
that.
could make a proposal
I think
that,
you're right.
because I
It's-
already have my program in
it's something.
place, that I'm doing A, B, C, and D through June and have access to the money, and then move into a different phase, just like you suggested, in the following year. Or I might do professional development between February and June, which doesn't require more teachers or whatever, and that they can accommodate that. When you start talking about teachers and equipment and those kinds of resources, that has to go into the
That's to do
budget.
the following year.
Yeah.
But in the situation, what I don't understand is that, so if we have a cycle that allows for the grants to say to be, the first round to be issued by the middle of December with a release at January, is it, schools can actually be adaptive to actually
Some of
put
them
something in place that fast before the following?
If they've been planning, and they have systems in place.
Even if they don't, right, even though they don't have the budget, they don't know whether or not, they don't have a yes or no until December, they could
Right.
actually put that fast, or put that in place.
Right,
If
but
they have
they-
existing infrastructure.
Right, but they might not be
Okay,
able
so
to just.
We're gonna have to.
generate-
Sorry.
break this, yes.
We're in the weeds, and we'll have another opportunity to be deeply in the weeds at the next council meeting on
So
this.
this will be a good
So
topic.
let Laura go
We have-
on a Friday.
Thank
I know
you,
you have
Laura.
relatives in
Thank
town.
you for-
But to be honest, this is such an important process for us. Because this is where we mix our
Yes.
worlds. Because this is the reality of the system.
Yep.
Yep.
Right,
So
and we're
thank you.
happy to work with you on
Yeah.
that.
Thank you, Laura. And we appreciate, we'll continue working with you on this. And as you can tell, we have, we have to understand, this is brand new to all of us. And so we're all trying to figure out what's the right way. Hopefully we can get beyond this and get to more talking about outcomes as opposed to the process to get there. But it is a way to walk before we run, so. All right, we have to do public, we don't have to, we are taking public testimony. I think Paul Anthony left. Jerry Ann, are you still wanting to make comments? Are you here? You're good?
Paul's on there?
He left, so he left after that. And Kimberly Herder, did you want to make any comments?
I did just for a second. but
Sure.
Yeah.
More of a,
Step up to the table. Join us. Why don't you just introduce yourself to the council?
I'm an introvert, so I can't stand in there.
That's okay.
We're all
Thank you for
introverts if you haven't guessed as well.
We just mask it really well.
Yes. So my name is Kimberly Herder, and I now work with Project Lead the Way, but for the last several years, I've worked for the Beaverton School District's Health and Science High School. Prior to that, I came from the corporate world, and then took time off to be a mom and started as a volunteer. So that's a little bit in how I got into the school district. I want to congratulate or thank. I was part when my last position at Health and Science High School was funded by a CTE grant. So it did not come through the STEM part, but really was a STEM situation. So I'm the one that was hired to charged. We took 11, we had a student body of almost 400 high school kids, and a program that involved 11 possibilities for kids to go out and have real world experiences. And with that grant money, within a year, it was only about 15% of the grant. We stopped counting at 350 opportunities for 350 students to be able to be out with ODOT on Susan just left, but it was up at OHSU and things like that. So I want to congratulate that you're thinking outside the box of just saying, okay, it has to go through and I didn't even know what a STEM center was until I'd been part of the grant for a year. So this totally came out of parents, kids' needs, and not even out of the classroom, but just saying, hey, if the kids, how am I going to get my kid excited about being a dentist when they've never even been to a dentist? And that brings tears to my eyes, because that was on one of my very first days. We started talking about, okay, will you use math to be a dentist? And we had a third of the freshman class and I come from high poverty area, that had never been to a dentist. So I can talk on several different ways on things with how that works, but really want to say that the impact it can have with in the real world, and working what I did was work within my sphere of influence, and that was who was in our neighborhood, who were the veterinarians, Kaiser Hospital is a mile away, things like that, who had a monthly ongoing relationship with 45 kids that include a meal, because these are kids on free and reduced too, that they could spend time with a surgeon and they could do those things. So the momentum is out there. I want to congratulate this and thank that this is available, but I also want to highly the out-of-the-box thinking of, not that the STEM, in my new role, I'm learning what a STEM hub is and helping with the East Side put one together and that sort of thing. And coming from a Project Lead the Way school, well, I probably would still be with the school district, but I was on a grant that we ran out and they couldn't fund me anymore. Not that I made didn't get paid even what a teacher made.
Yeah.
But anyway, that,
And schools choose to.
it's how, that there's a need. And when you look in, as you guys know, when you have a sixth grader looking in you in the eye and not knowing what they're gonna be, okay, sorry. I wanted to say on the summer programs, I come from this arena as well, and the after-school programs, while they're huge, 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 and we have one now established with our middle school up at OHSU. But these, when you were dealing with the equity issue, there's no busing to get them home after school. Huge population of my high school kids during the summer had to work to help pay the bills. And also we're taking care of grandma who's failing, but know that they want to go into medicine because they're watching grandma die. And so it's looking at that after school, and I'm shaking because I'm so passionate about it. Those summer programs, that if it's a way to get it in the school day, that it's supported by your classmates and somebody. I was a foreign exchange student, so I know it's like having upper level thinking, but you don't even know how to say, where's the bathroom? You know, so that you can have those support mechanisms in place when it can happen during a school day. Not that these other programs aren't valuable, but there's a percentage of the population that just can't get home. And OHSU, Lewis and Clark would donate bus passes, but still you've got a sixth grader riding TriMet and making 3 stops to get home at 9 o'clock at night. So I just want to I just wanted to express that there are those of us out there, just by serendipity, have fallen into these places that have some knowledge and expertise, but we're not teachers, but we're passionate and can see that all the pieces are there. What this council is just trying to put those pieces together, and it takes money. Because I was just telling Aubrey, I've got one school, Butternut Creek in Hillsborough, who sits in the shadow of an Intel. And the parents who work for Intel in that neighborhood are the janitors. They're not the ones who have the extra resources, but still can, when they're cleaning the cubicles, see, I want my kid to have that job, but don't have the tools in the classroom or the trained teachers to talk about coding at a kindergarten level. So, sorry about
Thank
that.
you.
That's
No,
much more than
really
my 3
appreciate it.
minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Appreciate your
much.
comments. Appreciate your passion and what you're doing.
So anyway, I applaud you, and I can leave my cards, because not necessarily as a Project Lead the Way employee, because that's helping me put my kids in college, who I'm taking next week to college, but it's more just a citizen of the neighborhood and the state of you're doing good things.
Thank you so much.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate it.
Thanks for your comments.
Thank you.
Makes us feel valuable. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other comments for the council before
I
we
think
close?
Aubrey has one.
Yes.
Oh, do you guys want Maker Faire tickets for the 12th and 13th at OMSI?
Yeah, I would.
How
I
many?
take 2. I take 2.
Mark?
The San Francisco.
I don't need to. My office is
You got a
down there
booth?
and I got a pass.
Me too, but I'll be gone. I'll be in San Francisco University.
Oh.
Technically,
I like some.
Okay, anything else for the really good meeting? I really appreciate the engagement.
Again, because
September.
Are you saying that we got a little bit of work to do here, Eric?
We've got some work to do, September 25th. We do have some committee
maybe we
schedule,
should
I
make
think,
it
next
sooner.
week, and I think we may want to defer some of the subcommittee work to
Yeah.
focus on
And
some of this.
the
And
interesting, well, before,
other things are
before
going.
we break off the subcommittee conversation, there's 5 of us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been working
Can
on
we
it.
meet a little bit sooner?
I would argue there's the subcommittee's 3. Why don't we just get all the subcommittees together and have just a meeting?
Yeah.
I mean, I
Well,
think-
September 25th.
I sooner. I
You
mean,
wanna-
it sounds
you
like
wanna
this
meet
is
Well,
sooner?
my concern is this, is that we do have legislative days before
Okay.
the 25th. And we do have
Okay.
these grant things scheduled going for the 25th.
Right.
So,
And that's when right, so I think that we're in a critical time right now, that we want to get ahead of this wave.
Yeah, it's moving.
And I
Okay.
think that as soon as we can get back together again, the better.
There's Friday, September 11th. We're being held for the data and metrics and the communication subcommittee. That's 2 weeks from now.
if it's in the afternoon, I come to Seattle that morning, but I can be back down here by noon.
We could go
So
1 to
we're talking about
3.
Friday the 11th? Good for me. Jim, can you do that?
In the afternoon.
September 11th.
I can call
I'll
it.
be gone.
I can call it in the afternoon and be here.
Yeah, I'll be in San Francisco.
On the 11th? Does it have to be Friday?
No, it doesn't have to be a Friday, but that's where we had a couple of holds on
I
the,
see.
we'd already
I see.
held, so we can just cancel the subcommittees.
I'll keep out with that
And meet.
whether you're gonna.
Let's try, can we try the afternoon?
Yeah?
Friday afternoon?
Yeah.
1 to 3 or 1 to 4?
Yeah.
We can go even shorter.
Go
One,
efficient.
1 to 3. but
1 to
1 to
3.
3.
I think we
Burn.
we just need to get at
Okay, and
most.
the focus of this specifically is around legislative days?
I think we need to, yep.
And what sort of
And are we
clarification?
also going to be talking about this whole issue that we just were talking about?
Section 7.
Well, it's just
Well-
overall engagement with the
Otherwise known as
Department of
Section
Education.
Section 7, our
So-
code,
This
Section
is
7.
really-
I don't know whether we could go deeply into the grants in time. I mean, we can try to around those innovation grants. And I can work with the Department of Education to try to move that
If we just
conversation
get-
forward.
Can we just at least try to
well-
strive for a framework so that we know kind of, we need more education, we need to understand what's possible, what's not, so that we can come out of that meeting with a feeling like this framework makes sense without going into the details of
To
it.
that point, Thompson, where do you think you are on the strategic piece? We reviewed it
Yeah.
in our meeting, and
Yeah.
are there 20 words to change, or are there 1,000?
So
words to
here's
change?
the issue. We have it in place, we don't have the wraparound that we need to actually go out and say, this is our publication.
So- so it's a matter of just-
communications and
It's a
marketing
communi-
group.
We just need a
This is why
writer
we don't have
to
that
write
piece.
the.
And you've got resources to do the writing right now, you think?
I think so. If I have to battle
Yeah.
some
So-
internal stuff.
So
But
what we
I
need
think
is
we
a
could-
narrative around it,
Yeah.
so that we can then be able to present it, but we have.
Yeah, the work looks.
All the strategies are
Yeah.
sound.
Yeah.
The
And
connections.
it's all been wordsmith, it's all good, it's all
Yeah,
tight.
because that's obviously going to be.
That's our
So
document for the North Star. But basically, our mandate was get the North Star, what we're doing is kind of,
Okay.
Now it's the velocity, make it accessible and consumable, and answer questions around equity, answer questions around
Right.
CTE connections.
so that it
all
can
of
be
that.
distributed to our legislators and all the rest of it.
So again,
Narrative.
from a legislative standpoint, if we're not going to make an ask, there's not a huge amount of hurry to get in front of them and report. We can report in the second legislative days. If we want something from them, we need to tee it up in September, focus on it in November, and get it in front of them in January.
Yeah, I think that maybe we'll have to talk about and I'll reach out to Senator Gembro to see, because
We're
he had
supposed to set up a committee.
something over the summer, which never happened.
Yeah, there was supposed to be a director to set up a committee to talk about the CTE STEM.
I
Integration,
hope
yeah.
Lindsay,
He heard.
the only way that's going to happen is if the governor's
Yeah.
office says.
No,
let's
he
do this
appreciated
thing.
that.
Yeah.
He appreciated
Yeah,
that.
and we just
I
need
think
to-
what we'll want to do is there's aspects of that we need to take, that we should move forward aggressively on, and there's aspects that require some bigger sensitivities.
It's missing a leadership piece, and Denbro will only take it so far.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're thinking.
All right.
Good.
Well,
Heard that.
I'm happy to meet again. I think that's.
Yeah.
September
even if
11th?
it's a little shorter,
1 to
it's
4.
just- Yep.
I thought it was.
Or 1 to 3, sorry.
1 to 3.
1 to 3.
And Dwayne, you're not going to be able to call it?
Okay. I'll work with
Is there-
Seth.
You can't make it? You
On
can't?
that?
I'll be
You're
able
out.
to call in
You
the
can
afternoon.
call in.
If it's in the morning, I can be
I
fixed.
should be here.
Okay. And we'll try to get some more representation from the Department of Education. I'll try to get on Salam's agenda prior to that to sort of express some of the conversation, communicate the conversation today and the desire for a partnership, and see.
Okay. Couple quick announcements. The Oregon Talent Council is formed.
Mm-hmm.
The new program manager is sitting behind you, Marcia Fisher.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
Yeah. They are having their inaugural meeting on Monday, Tuesday the 1st.
Tuesday the 1st, 12:30 in Salem at the CCC.
The first 7, was it? How many board members were chosen?
10 have
10.
been identified. I think we're going to have of that 7 are available.
Okay. So 10 have been identified, but that's about half the actual board strength that by law, or by law or charter. So again, if you know people who are very interested in continuing this at a more focused level in higher education, that board has the dollars. They get the grant. directly.
And they have what, about 5?
6.1.
6.1.
That's for startup programs, right? Just to fill niches that are being fulfilled.
Start
not being
programs,
fulfilled.
hire, get
Not
things
ongoing,
going.
not ongoing.
But non-ongoing support, exactly.
Critical difference.
But this is a critical time, and anytime you start a new council, this is not ETIC 2.0, this is a new council. And anytime you start a new council, it's going to be critical that there's lots of eyes watching to keep it pointed in the right direction.
So how are we aligning
Don't we have an
with
ex
them?
officio spot?
We have an ex officio spot by law.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
Yes. And we need to establish agreements between, so to me, one of the things that is on your sheet of roles and responsibility is to play the bridging role between what the talent council is looking at workforce and economic development needs.
Right.
They're working with us, and we then translate those into direct investments outside of their purview of investing in the post-secondary space.
Well, I will be
To have a-
attending on Tuesday, so I will take it as I'll be the mole for the first meeting. and
My
we can
understanding is
figure
that
out
when,
what that is.
sorry, go on.
But I'll just say, I'm going to be there, I can report back on what's going on a little bit, but we need to figure out that ex officio person and assign them.
We do.
as a duty. Okay.
And who's the chair of it? Who's the chair? Are they-
David Childers is
Childers.
the chair, who
Okay.
was my vice chair at ETIC, so
Okay.
we have the right person in that position
He's
to
good.
launch.
And my understanding is one of the first steps in that process is to do a study around needs. And is that currently being done?
Yeah.
Yes.
Of workforce needs? and-
Just started, yes, that's still very much in development. That is the first charge of the council, is to develop the working
talent plan.
The talent plan. And when is that talent plan due for, when's that going to be ready?
Excellent question. So much of this will be discussed at the upcoming meeting. If I may, can I chime in here?
Chime in.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so the talent plan, the draft idea, which will be discussed with the new council, is just forming, as Eric has mentioned. So the council has not seen this yet, but the initial idea is that the draft talent plan will be ready for review with the council and council actions and involvement engagement by October 1st. And then there'll be an ongoing review input process with stakeholders, which will include the STEM Investment Council, and I'm sure it will, and we'll go from there.
The investments go into the higher education system.
Right.
Yes.
The timeline on the grants is you would need to be able to put forth those grants by about June and have the recommendations by June of next year.
But it's a perfect example of where alignment with all of our
Alignment is
work
critical.
together is
Yeah.
absolutely critical.
Right.
So that I think that we have to put that as one of our, a very clear intention and desire, because if we know what the end game is, which is getting the right kids, all of these pieces all need to start being put in place.
It's almost like there's a plan.
Wouldn't that be amazing?
Wonder how that happened.
Okay, thank you all, and good discussion.
Good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, man.